The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. The nightmare started over a month ago when I heard my husband mumble, "He's standing in the garden. He's looking in the window." It must have been 2 in the morning. I sighed and rubbed my eyes. You could set your watch by him. At that time, my sleep had been disturbed regularly by Daryl's sleepwalking and sleep-talking, and sometimes sleep yelling. He'd never done anything like that before. It had just started out of the blue about 3 days prior to that night. That night, when he was whispering, mumbling while he dreamt. His voice was low and hushed. "He's trying to get inside." I couldn't help but look over at the curtained windows. I imagined that if I pulled the curtains aside, I'd see a ghostly hand pressed up on the window pane. The little hairs on my neck stood on end. I shook my husband awake. He jolted like he'd just tripped over something, and his eyes shot open. He breathed heavily but quickly came to. "Was I talking again?" he asked out of breath. Sweat beaded his forehead. "Yeah, it just keeps getting creepier." My eyes were wide. He looked over at me, his face tired. "Was it the guy in the garden?" I nodded. "Yeah, you said he was trying to look through the windows." He rubbed his eyes and replied, "I can't remember really. It's so vivid while I'm asleep, but as soon as I'm awake it just slips away." I rubbed his arm, trying to comfort him. "Let's try and get back to bed. We need to pick up Jacob early." He nodded and got out of bed to fetch some water and a melatonin pill. I drank the rest of some cold chamomile tea I'd not finished the night before. Then we went back to bed. It was about 3 in the morning when we fell back to sleep. At 7 o'clock the next morning, my alarm rang loud and shrill. I kept my eyes closed as I fumbled for it and hit the snooze button. By 7:30 we were up and on our way to the train station. Jacob was waiting for us with a large suitcase and an old worn backpack. Jacob was our nephew. He was a scrawny guy with dark brown hair and bright green eyes. Jacob had just started his final year at university and was studying zoology. He was considering starting veterinary school after his bachelor's degree was done and was visiting schools around the country. Daryl and I lived near a large veterinary hospital and school, so Jacob had come by to see if it was any good. He knew we were in the area, and so he'd decided to stay with us in the meantime. His eyes were dark and exhausted as we pulled up. "How was the train?" I asked as he climbed into the back seat. Daryl loaded Jacob's suitcase into the trunk and got back into the driver's seat. Delayed and uncomfortable. I was just managing to get some sleep right as I arrived. "Figures," Jacob said, his voice irritable and feeble. "Well, you can get plenty of rest at the house. It's quiet at the moment with everyone away for the holidays. The family of 4 next door is in Ecuador." We continued to chat as Daryl drove us home. Jacob mentioned he was excited to check out the school and would leave to take a tour the next day. I asked Daryl to drive him, but Jacob said he'd rather take the bus so he could get to know the area better. The day after that was Sunday, so we slept in and had breakfast food for lunch. After that, Jacob left for the bus stop. Daryl and I did some chores, and then we sat down to read. The air was peaceful and quiet. I remember it was the last time I had felt relaxed, felt normal and comfortable in my own home. The day had been warm and bright, and sunbeams illuminated small motes of dust in the air. Pretty soon Daryl and I both fell asleep on the couch, leaning against one another. Suddenly there was a loud shout, and I sat up, my eyes wide and suddenly very awake. Daryl was sitting up straight, his chest heaving heavily with breath. That was a bad one," he panted. "What happened? Why did you shout?" I asked, my hand on my chest. I was dreaming about that guy again, except he wasn't alone this time. This time he was with a woman. They were standing just outside. He turned to look at the window. They were throwing rock. Out of nowhere there was the deafening shatter of glass. I yelled. Darryl leapt to his feet in fright. I glanced down at the floor. Among a pile of broken glass lay a single rock. It was small, dark, and smooth as glass. As soon as I looked at it, I felt a cold trail of goose flesh run down my neck and arms. There was something so unnatural about that rock. It looked artificially polished. Darryl and I ran to the window, carefully avoiding the shards. There was nothing outside save my front yard. My petunias and crane lilies waved gently in the breeze. No one was standing there. The air was thick with silence. All the neighbors were still away on holiday. Darryl and I looked at one another, our eyes searching each other's expressions for some kind of explanation. I was hoping Darryl would declare himself the mastermind of this terrifying practical joke, but no confessions came. "Must be kids playing a prank," he said as he cleaned the glass and tossed the stone into the yard. But his face was still white and his hands trembled. He wasn't quite convinced. Later that same evening, Jacob returned from his sightseeing and was thrilled. We decided not to tell Jacob about what had happened, and Darryl, being a very proficient engineer, had already replaced the window pane that afternoon. Jacob couldn't stop going on about the facilities and the local cafes. We were happy for him as we ordered pizza and watched some silly rom-coms. We all went to bed at around midnight. As I lay in bed and turned off my light, I couldn't help but look over at the curtained windows momentarily. The curtains hung ruby red and still as stone. Was there someone standing outside? I shivered as I rolled over in bed and cuddled up close to my husband. I was glad to have my back to the window. I felt like I'd just closed my eyes when I was disturbed. I had turned over while half asleep and found myself suddenly alone in bed. It's always disconcerting to find yourself unexpectedly alone in the middle of the night. At first, my face still buried in a pillow, I figured Darryl was on the toilet. As I rolled over and opened my eyes, I noticed a figure standing at the foot of our bed. It was Darryl. I jumped from fright and yelped. "My God, Darryl, you frightened me," I said as I clutched my chest and breathed hard. "What are you doing standing there?" I asked. Darryl did not stir. His back still faced me. He seemed to be staring at the curtains in front of him. Then he spoke, and it filled me with terror. "They're outside. They're calling," he said, his voice flat and vacant. He was sleep-talking again, and now he was sleepwalking. I felt my stomach fill with boiling lead. "Come back to bed," I said shakily as I slowly sat up. Something wasn't right. "They're outside. They're coming." His voice sounded slurred, like he'd been drinking. Darryl took a few quick steps toward the window. I felt my heart skip a beat. I ripped the duvet off my legs, but as my feet touched the floor, there was a tremendous smash. I screamed as the window to my right shattered into 1,000 pieces. The sudden commotion made me lose my balance, and I fell on the ground hard. I felt a frigid gust howl through the broken window. "What?" I didn't get a chance to finish speaking before the window in front of Darryl exploded too. The wind that blasted through was so strong and cold it forced my eyes closed. My teeth began to chatter. How was it suddenly so cold? "Darryl?" The wind died down and I opened my eyes. Darryl was gone. My mind felt empty. My limbs were heavy. Confusion washed over me. "Darryl?" I said again. The wind had vanished and the chill in the air had retreated completely. I slowly stood. My eyes searched the ground for signs of another rock, but there was nothing. I walked up to the closest smashed window. When I looked outside, all I saw was my garden shrouded in darkness. The half-moon was obscured by wispy clouds. "What?" I whispered, unable to comprehend what had just happened. I suddenly heard a hoarse whisper behind me. "Auntie Valerie, what's going on?" I spun around to see the dark silhouette of Jacob standing in my bedroom doorway. I could just make out the look of worry on his face. "I'm not sure. Your uncle is missing. I'm not sure what happened. The windows, they broke. I think I need to call the police." I hurried over to my phone and called 911. Within 15 minutes, 2 exhausted-looking police officers arrived and took my statement. I trembled as I spoke. I told them everything. I told them about my husband's dreams. I told them about the smashed window from the afternoon, and I also showed them the mess in my bedroom. They were sympathetic and offered to drive me to the hospital for a checkup. I declined. I just needed rest. They told me not to worry. that my husband probably hadn't gotten far, that he must have broken the windows in his sleep. When I tried to tell them there was no way my husband broke the windows, one of the cops said, "Look, people can do weird and out-of-character things while sleepwalking. We once had to go fetch some teenage kid from some park in the middle of the night. He was up some tree and refused to climb down. He'd done it all in his sleep." They said they'd look around the area and let me know if they found him. Jacob gave a statement too, but he had been asleep. After he heard the window smash, he'd gone through to investigate. A few minutes after the police left, I found myself sitting on my couch with a cup of cocoa clutched in my still shaking hands. Jacob sat near me and tried to comfort me. He got me a blanket. I was still unable to comprehend what had happened. My eyes stared into space, unblinking. Where had Daryl gone? Who were those people? I felt a lump of dread lodge itself in my stomach. What the hell had happened? A week went by. The police still had no information. Jacob postponed going home to help look after me. He was really such a sweet kid. It was late in the afternoon and I was preparing lunch. Suddenly Jacob walked into the kitchen. Auntie Valerie, can I talk with you?" I stopped dicing onions and looked up at him. His expression was guilty. He was awkwardly rubbing the back of his neck with his hand. "Yes. What's up?" I said curiously, putting down the knife. He looked embarrassed. His eyes couldn't meet mine. I kind of lied. To the police, and you, about what happened that night, last week, when it happened." I felt my breath catch in my throat. My heart fluttered. What do you mean?" I said. He paused. It seemed to last forever. The room felt so silent, I could hear my heart thump loudly in my chest. Jacob still couldn't meet my gaze as he replied, "I forgot to close my curtains that night, and something must have disturbed me in my sleep, because I woke up in the middle of the night before the windows smashed. When I sat up in bed, I froze. I saw people standing outside, at least a dozen people. I couldn't see their faces, just dark shapes, their outlines. They were all in the garden. I didn't know what to do. Then suddenly I heard the windows smash and I got distracted. I looked away from my window for a second, and when I looked back..." He paused. Tears were now forming in his eyes. "I saw Uncle Daryl. He was standing right at my window. He was staring in at me. I couldn't see his eyes, but I knew it was him. Slowly he turned around and walked away. As I blinked, he vanished. That's when I got out of bed and came out to see you. I was convinced I had dreamt the whole thing. I mean, how could that be possible? I was scared the cops, that you, would think I was crazy. But now I don't think it was just my imagination. I've seen them again. Not in my dreams. I mean, I saw them outside my window. I saw them last night. I don't know what's happening. I think I should go home, but I don't want to abandon you." He was crying now. His voice was full of fear. I was shaking. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Don't worry, my boy. Everything's going to be fine. I'm sure it was just a dream. I mean, I didn't actually see anyone else myself. The police are probably right. They'll find your uncle." I gave him a big hug. "Maybe it would be a good idea for you to go home. You must miss your own bed. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine. And after everything that's happened, you should go home. I'm sure your parents are anxious to see you. Let's get you sorted." Within an hour, Jacob was packed and I drove him to the train station. We didn't speak much on the way there, and when we said goodbye, I gave him an extra tight hug. I'd never admit it to him, but I was dreading going back home alone, back to that same bed. The bedroom windows had been repaired, but I still felt a cold wind whenever I looked at them. It was 2 o'clock the next morning when my phone started ringing. Groggily, I reached over to my bedside table. I answered, my voice croaky from sleep. "Yes," I said, sitting up. I switched on my light. They were on the train. I heard a flat, monotone voice answer. A chill rippled down my spine. "Jacob," I said softly. "They were on the train. They found me." All traces of sleep vanished from my voice. "Jacob, this isn't funny," I said angrily. I was terrified at that moment. There was a slight pause before he continued. They're outside your house too. They're outside. They want to come inside. What the hell do they want, Jacob? Are you okay? Suddenly the phone went dead. I just sat in bed. My nerves were burning with fear. I didn't get any sleep that night. I wasn't surprised when I got a call from my sister a few hours later. Jacob had never got home. I told her and the police I'd dropped him off, and the security footage at the train station confirmed my story. It even showed him board the train at 6:30 that evening. He'd taken an overnight train. But the security footage from his destination showed no trace of him. Just like Daryl, he had vanished. I also hadn't told anyone about Jacob's phone call, and the police never brought it up. Had it ever happened? I decided not to tell my sister anything more than what I'd told the police. I felt a numbness in my brain and body that refused to abate. I hardly had the motivation to do anything except eat and drink for days after that. I haven't been able to leave my house for 2 weeks now. I never open the curtains anymore. Every night I sit in my living room, the lights on, and every night since Jacob disappeared, I've heard a gentle tapping. A tapping on my living room windows. Last night I heard their voices for the first time. I heard Daryl and Jacob. They were both calling me, stretching out the vowels in my name as they spoke. Valerie, Valerie. They want to come in, Valerie. They just want to talk. It's not so bad, Valerie. I felt completely helpless. The police were useless, of course. Whenever I called them and they showed up, the things outside would vanish. They now told me to stop bothering them or they'd charge me with wasting police time. And it seems that running away wasn't really an option. The sun is beginning to set, and I find myself sitting once again in my living room. I've boarded up all my windows and sit on my sofa clutching a golf club in my hands. Maybe I can't stop them from getting inside, but I'd be damned if I wasn't going to put up a fight. I've also left myself a secret way out just in case, but won't write that down here. I don't want them to find it out. The sun is now completely gone. I can hear the tapping on my window. It is louder than before. My grip on the golf club tightens. The tapping has now turned into full-on knocking. Someone was banging their fists hard on the boarded windows. I've decided to write this all down so that when I suddenly disappear, people may be able to figure out what happened here. Maybe they can find Daryl or Jacob, or me, but I figure it's likely no one will ever see me again. Perhaps it won't be so bad. At least I will be with Daryl and Jacob again soon. I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but I'm desperate for help or advice. I don't know if anyone will believe me, but I need to share what happened. It all started when my Aunt Meredith died a few months ago. The night she passed, I had this vivid nightmare. I was climbing an endless staircase in a house that kept growing taller. Every time I thought I reached the top, a new floor would appear. My legs ached, my lungs burned, but I couldn't stop climbing. I knew that if I did, I'd fall all the way down, back to where I started. I woke up gasping for air, my phone ringing with news of Aunt Meredith's death. After our parents passed years ago, my sister Emily spiraled down a dark path for a few years, leaving me to forge a bond with Aunt Meredith, who rented a small apartment in the city back then. I spent countless evenings with her, sharing tea and stories while gently petting her cat, Willis. The reading of Aunt Meredith's will was a shock. Emily inherited a house none of us knew existed, while I got Willis. The injustice of it burned. Emily, who barely called Aunt Meredith except for money, got a home, while I, despite my decent job, remained trapped in an overpriced shoebox apartment. With the housing market as insane as it is, owning a home felt like an impossible dream for me. Our resulting fight over this uneven inheritance left us estranged for months. Then last night my phone lit up at 2 a.m. with Emily's name. "Liz," Emily's voice trembled on the other end, "I need you to come over, to the house." The house, that dilapidated 2-story in a forgettable neighborhood with its peeling paint and overgrown yard. The house that should have been mine, or so I'd childishly thought. I swallowed my pride and the bitter taste of jealousy. "Em, it's the middle of the night. What's going on?" "Please," she whispered. I want you to have it. The house. Just come." I was silent for a moment, then scoffed. "So you're calling me at 2 a.m. to tell me you want to give me the house you wouldn't even let me rent a room in a few months ago?" Are you using again? The irritation in my voice was palpable. No, she clamored. Just come over, please. Each word sounded like it was being dragged over broken glass. I'll come over later today, I promise. I need you now, she cut me off, her voice rising to a near shriek. I could hear her crying, gasping on the verge of hyperventilating. My mind and anxiety raced. What if she was using and alone on a bad trip, riddled with guilt over taking the house instead of sharing it with me? Or what if she was having a panic attack, realizing she couldn't take care of the place or afford it? Could she be in sleep-deprived psychosis and need help? I sighed heavily. Okay, I'm on my way. The drive over was a blur of streetlights and confusion, and as I pulled up to the curb, I had to double-check the address. This couldn't be right. The dilapidated two-story I remembered first seeing a few months ago had transformed. Fresh paint gleamed in the moonlight. The yard was immaculately manicured, and there was even a new porch swing. It looked like it had been plucked from a home renovation show. Still, as I approached, a chill ran down my spine. Even though the house looked beautiful, shadows seemed to writhe across the facade, the darkness of them unnaturally deep. The air felt thick, oppressive, carrying a coppery scent that made my stomach churn. I found the front door ajar. Emily? My voice seemed swallowed by the musty air. Stepping inside, I was struck by the interior. Modern furniture clashed with antique fixtures. Sleek, minimalist pieces sat beside ornate, centuries-old decorations. It was as if the house couldn't decide which era it belonged to. I kept walking as the floorboards creaked ominously under my feet. Emily! I called again. Up here. Her voice drifted down from upstairs, oddly flat. As I crept up the stairs, I felt like I was wading through molasses. Family portraits hung on the wall, their eyes following my ascent. Each step up felt heavier than the last. Dizziness washed over me, and whispers just below audibility swirled around my head. When I reached the top, I saw Emily standing at the end of the hallway, her back to me. Em, what's going on? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She turned slowly, and I barely stifled a scream. It looked like Emily, but her eyes were wrong. Too dark, too empty. When she smiled, it stretched unnaturally wide across her face. Oh, Liz, not Emily said, her voice a chorus of others. I'm so glad you came. We've been waiting for you. I stumbled backward, my back hitting the hallway wall. Picture frames rattled, accompanied by what sounded like children's laughter. What are you talking about? Where's Emily? Where's my real sister? Not Emily's grin widened impossibly further. Emily is here. We're all here. And soon you'll... I ran before Not Emily could even finish the last sentence. Blind with terror, I crashed down the stairs, slamming into walls as I desperately sought the exit. Behind me, I heard a cacophony of voices, some calling my name with hungry eagerness, others screaming for help. As I burst through the front door, I heard Emily's voice, her real voice, call out from somewhere deep within the house. Liz, help me! Don't leave me here! I froze on the porch, torn between self-preservation and the need to save my sister. In that moment of hesitation, I felt something cold brush against my ankle. I looked down to see a tendril of shadow coiling around my leg, trying to pull me back inside. With a scream, I wrenched myself free, stumbling onto the neatly manicured lawn. As I caught my breath, I felt a familiar nudge against my leg. Willis? How did he get here? His eyes gleamed in the darkness, and he meowed insistently, looking back at the house. It was almost as if he was urging me to go back in. Heart pounding, I heard Emily's continued screams for help, and I realized I couldn't leave my sister. I had to find her. I ran back inside, and I followed her voice, dodging grasping shadows and whispers that grew teeth. I found her in the attic, surrounded by dust-covered relics and dozens of mirrors. As I reached for Emily's hand, I noticed her skin was pale, almost translucent. Her eyes, once warm brown, now reflected the room like polished glass. Not Emily's voice echoed around us, seeming to come from every reflective surface. As she spoke, her mouth moved a fraction of a second after the words, like a badly dubbed film. Oh, Liz, Aunt Meredith always said you had your father's eyes. Her head tilted at an impossible angle, neck stretching unnaturally. Come, See for yourself. These mirrors don't just reflect us, they receive us. The temperature in the attic plummeted. My breath came out in visible puffs as Not Emily continued, her smile widening beyond the confines of her face. We're the legacy this house inherits piece by piece, generation after generation. As she spoke, I saw flickers of other faces superimposed over hers, men, women, children, all wearing the same grotesque smile. The family album is always expanding, and there's a frame waiting just for you. Emily! I grabbed her ice-cold hand, but as we turned to flee, the attic door slammed shut. One ancient-looking mirror began to ripple like disturbed water, and the floor beneath us softened and shifted. I leapt for the door, but Emily sank into the now liquid wood, her eyes wide with terror. The last thing I saw before the darkness claimed my sister was her reflection in the mirror, now calm and serene, taking its place among the house's eternal residents. I managed to wrench the attic door open and tumble down the stairs, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't stop running until I was in my car, speeding away from that cursed place. As I sit here typing this, I'm shaking. I don't know what to do. Emily's not just trapped there, she's become a part of that monstrous dwelling. I can't go to the police, they'd never believe me. I'm going to start researching, try to find a way to end this, but I'm scared. What if I can't stop it? What if I go back and become part of the family portrait? I don't know how I'm going to sleep tonight, but I am comforted that Willis is here snuggling next to me. Still, as I look at him, I can't help but wonder, why did Aunt Meredith leave him to me in her will? Officer Dave Mulligan wiped the sleep from his eyes as he pulled up to the scene in his cruiser, the red and blue lights swirling lazily in the early morning mist. It was 5:45 a.m., just before dawn, the time of day when nothing made sense to anyone awake. The call had come in less than 20 minutes ago, a disturbance on the outskirts of town, a small neighborhood that bordered the local forest preserve. The dispatcher didn't have many details beyond a crowd forming and unusual activity. That alone was enough to make his morning interesting. As he turned the corner onto Mill Street, he could already see the crowd of locals gathered at the far end of the block, spilling out into the middle of the road. They were standing in tight clusters, all facing the same direction like a congregation, murmuring among themselves with a mix of confusion and something close to reverence. Dave pulled the cruiser to a stop. Frowning at the mass of people, he flicked on his radio. "This is Mulligan. I'm at Mill Street. Got a crowd here, maybe 30, 40 people. Gonna check it out." "Roger that, Mulligan," came the dispatcher's voice, crackling over the static. "Be advised, National Guard is being mobilized for some areas. Just a heads up." He blinked at the radio, processing that. The National Guard, for a crowd of early risers. "Copy," he said, shaking his head and stepping out of the car. His boots hit the asphalt with a dull thud, and he adjusted his belt as he approached the crowd. Whatever was going on, it had the whole block's attention. A few people noticed him and parted ways slightly, giving him an uneasy look. Dave didn't like the atmosphere. There was an odd stillness in the air, like something unnatural was hanging over them all. He walked up to a heavy-set man in a bathrobe standing near the back of the group. "Hey, what's going on here?" The man looked at him with wide eyes, his face pale. You better take a look, officer. There's something up there on the roof." Dave's frown deepened, and he pushed through the crowd until he was standing at the front, facing a modest 2-story house at the end of the street. His eyes followed where everyone else was looking, and then he saw it. On the roof of the house, kneeling on the shingles like it was offering up a prayer, was a figure. A small, hunched creature, about 5 feet tall, its features barely distinguishable in the dim morning light. It was humanoid, no doubt about that, but it was wrapped in something like a cloak or robe, its face hidden under a shadowy hood. Its hands were clasped together in front of it, and it was perfectly still, as though locked in some deep, silent meditation. Dave's first instinct was that it was some kind of prank, a sick joke played by teenagers with too much time on their hands. But as he stared at the thing on the roof, a cold, creeping sensation started to gnaw at the back of his mind. This wasn't a mannequin, and it wasn't some kid dressed up. The stillness of the figure, the strange aura around it. It didn't feel right. "What the hell is that?" Dave muttered to himself. A woman next to him clutched her jacket tightly around her shoulders, whispering under her breath. "It's been there for an hour, just kneeling." Dave turned to her. "You see anyone put it up there? Anyone messing around before this?" She shook her head, her eyes wide. "No, officer, no one's been near it. It just appeared." He bit back a retort and pulled his radio up again. "Dispatch, this is Mulligan. I've got eyes on something here. You're going to want to get the chief out here, maybe a couple more cars. Hell, maybe even a helicopter if we can spare it." "Roger that, Mulligan. National Guard is already en route to multiple locations. Hold tight." That phrase again, National Guard. Something more was going on. Dave couldn't shake the unease prickling his skin. This wasn't the only sighting, was it? He moved closer to the house, trying to get a better look. As he stepped onto the lawn, his footfalls silent on the dewy grass, he could hear the crowd murmuring nervously behind him. His hand hovered over the grip of his pistol, but he didn't draw it. Not yet. He wasn't even sure if this thing was alive, let alone dangerous. When he reached the base of the house, he looked up, trying to see the creature's face, but it was still shrouded in darkness. He called up to it, his voice firm but hesitant. "Hey, you up there! What are you doing? Come down!" No response. The figure didn't move an inch. Dave's hand drifted down to his flashlight, and he clicked it on, aiming the beam at the thing on the roof. The light hit the creature, casting harsh shadows across its form. It was definitely humanoid, though its skin, or was that fabric, looked wrong, like it was both solid and transparent at the same time. The texture reminded him of smoke or mist trapped in a mold, as if it wasn't entirely real. "Jesus," Dave breathed, his fingers tightening around the flashlight. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Behind him, the crowd shifted uneasily. Whispers floated through the air, people muttering prayers, others questioning what they were seeing. More people were showing up by the minute, drawn by the strange spectacle. A few tried to snap photos with their Polaroids, but most just stared in a kind of quiet awe. The radio crackled to life on his belt. "Mulligan, this is Chief Henderson. I'm 5 minutes out. What's your status?" Dave lifted the radio to his lips. "We've got a situation here, Chief. You're going to want to see this for yourself. I can't really explain it." The chief's voice came back, calm but tense. "Just hold the perimeter. National Guard's en route. Don't let anyone get too close." "Understood," Dave replied, glancing back at the crowd. Some of them had edged closer to the house, as if drawn toward the figure by an invisible pull. "Hey, everyone back up," he called out. "Stay behind the sidewalk." A few people grumbled, but most obeyed, shuffling backward. Dave could sense the growing anxiety in the air. He felt it too, a gnawing tension that made his stomach churn. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't right. There was something deeply unsettling about its presence, something that set off every instinct in his body. 5 minutes later, Chief Henderson's cruiser pulled up alongside Dave's, and the older man stepped out, looking every bit as groggy and confused as Dave had felt when he first arrived. The chief was a no-nonsense type, a man who'd been through his share of crises, but even he seemed taken aback when he saw the creature on the roof. "What in God's name is that?" Henderson muttered, walking up to stand beside Dave. "I don't know," Dave replied, his voice low. "It's just been kneeling there, praying or something. People say it just appeared out of nowhere." The chief stared at the figure for a long moment, his jaw clenched. "National Guard's already mobilized," he said after a pause. "They're sealing off other areas where similar reports have come in." "Other areas?" Dave raised an eyebrow. Henderson nodded grimly. "We're not the only ones, Mulligan. Calls are coming in from all over the state. Hell, all over the country. By the sound of it, same description. Humanoid figure preying on rooftops and hills. It's spreading fast." Dave felt a chill run down his spine. What the hell is this, Chief? Some kind of protest? A cult? "I wish I knew," Henderson replied, running a hand through his graying hair. "But I'll tell you this much. This isn't some local prank. Whatever's going on, it's bigger than us." As if on cue, the distant hum of helicopters filled the air, and moments later, a National Guard chopper swooped in low. circling above the neighborhood. Dave shielded his eyes from the glare of the spotlight as it swept over the scene, illuminating the crowd and the figure on the roof. "Looks like the cavalry's here," Dave muttered, though he didn't feel reassured. If anything, the presence of the military only made the situation feel more surreal, more dangerous. A convoy of military vehicles rolled up moments later, soldiers jumping out to form a perimeter around the house. Their movements were efficient and disciplined, but Dave could see the same look of confusion on their faces as they stared at the creature on the roof. One of the soldiers, a young lieutenant by the look of him, approached Dave and Henderson. "We're securing the area, officers. Orders are to keep civilians back and prevent any direct contact with the entity." The chief nodded. "We've got the crowd under control for now, but what's the plan?" The lieutenant hesitated, glancing up at the figure. "Honestly, sir, we don't know yet. Higher-ups are scrambling to figure out what we're dealing with. For now, we're just supposed to contain it." Dave exchanged a glance with Henderson. Contain it? How were they supposed to contain something that wasn't moving, wasn't attacking, something that just knelt there, praying in silence? As the day wore on, more soldiers arrived, setting up barricades and cordoning off the area. News vans started to appear, reporters jostling for position as they tried to get footage of the strange phenomenon. The whole situation had the feel of a circus, except no one was laughing. People were scared, and the presence of the National Guard only amplified the tension. By noon, the sky was a dull grey, thick clouds rolling in from the west. The creature on the roof hadn't moved an inch, but the weight of its presence seemed to press down on everyone. Dave had stayed at the scene, watching as the crowd grew and the media swarmed. Every so often he glanced up at the figure, half expecting it to vanish or change somehow, but it remained the same, locked in its eternal prayer. At one point, a group of religious zealots showed up, waving signs and chanting about the end of days. They gathered just outside the barricades, shouting at the soldiers and the police, declaring that the creatures were a sign from God. Dave tried to ignore them, but their words dug into his mind. A sign of what? By mid-afternoon, the tension had reached a breaking point. More reports were flooding in from across the country. Hundreds of these creatures had appeared, all of them in the same posture, on rooftops and hillsides, in cities and rural towns. No one had any answers, and fear was spreading like wildfire. Dave stood by the barricade, watching the crowd, his hands clenched into fists. He didn't know what to make of any of it. None of this felt real, but the weight of it, the sheer scale of it, pressed down on him like a lead blanket. And then, as the sun began to set, something happened. The creature on the roof moved. It was subtle at first, a slight shift in its posture, the faintest twitch of its head. But Dave saw it, and so did the crowd. A murmur rippled through the air, people gasping and pointing. "Chief!" Dave called out, turning to Henderson, who was standing a few feet away. Henderson looked up just as the creature slowly lowered its hands from the prayer position, placing them on the roof beside it. Its hooded head tilted upward, as if gazing at the darkening sky. The crowd fell silent, a palpable sense of dread filling the air. And then, in one smooth motion, the creature stood up. The silence broke in an instant. People screamed, soldiers raised their weapons, reporters shoved forward to get a better shot. Dave's heart raced as he stared at the figure, now fully upright on the roof. It stood there, motionless, its face still hidden in shadow. "What do we do?" one of the soldiers shouted, panic edging into his voice. "Hold your fire," the lieutenant ordered, though he sounded uncertain. The creature stood still for a moment longer, then turned its head, slowly scanning the horizon. Dave watched, frozen in place, as it took one step forward, then another. And then, without warning, it leapt off the roof. Gasps and screams filled the air as the creature descended, landing with an eerie grace in the middle of the street. It straightened up, its form towering over the crowd, casting a long, dark shadow in the fading light. Dave's hand went to his gun, but he didn't draw it. He wasn't sure what good it would do. Grand Lake is picturesque, I'll give it that. My dad's doing this professor-in-residence gig at the Grand Lake Lodge, giving lectures a couple of times a week on technological innovations in corporate accounting. Exciting, right? Honestly, it's kind of weird being here for the whole semester. especially since I've been used to hanging out with my friends on campus. But it's only one remote semester. So the toughest part hasn't been the isolation or even missing out on the social stuff. It's the fact that I'm not much of an outdoorsy person. While everyone else is out hiking or kayaking, I've found myself pretty bored, though I have found some solace by holing up in the brand new library in town. It's actually been a bit of a lifesaver. There's something about being surrounded by shelves full of books, some of them barely touched, that feels comforting. The library's modern, but somehow still feels like it's been here forever, like it's seen generations of readers come and go. Usually, there's a little lively group of people at all of the desks in the middle of the library, studying, watching shows on their laptops, catching up over coffee. The noise level of the place is a little unusual for a library. I've been spending my days tucked away in the quieter corners, knocking out some lectures and coursework, then losing myself in the kinds of books that I'm a little embarrassed to admit are my favorite. I'll inject cozy fantasies into my veins if you'd let me, but lately, there has been this weird feeling, like someone else is here with me, watching me and only me. Maybe it's just the strangeness of being in a new place, or maybe it's all of the fantasies I've been reading, but the sense that I'm not alone, it's hard to shake. I'll get the strongest tingle of someone gazing at me when I get up to get a coffee or take a bathroom break, like someone's been watching me read. But I always trudge on. Nobody's going to keep me from churning through some good books. One day, hungrier than usual, I decided to call it early, around 11 a.m. I exited the library and pulled up food options on my phone. By the time I found a pizza place that sold slices, I could feel that someone was standing next to me, too close to me in my personal space. As I looked up, I could feel the hair on my arms suddenly raise. A man was staring right at me, from less than an arm's reach away. He appeared to be a well-dressed gentleman in his mid-30s, with piercing forest green eyes, but there was something uncanny about his demeanor. "You have exquisite tastes in literature," he said to me with a big smile. I was more than a little caught off guard. "Thanks," I finally said after a few awkward moments of silence. "Harry Potter, The Hobbit, Earthsea." I started wondering how many times he had watched me read. Nice light reads, yes, but the worlds within can be quite dark. I'm sorry, have we met?" I finally asked him. "Marek," he said, shaking his head. "Marek, that's a unique name." "I'm looking for an intern with your background," he said confidently, as if he was bestowing a great honor upon me. "My background? I've seen you read about worlds unlike your own and accept them willingly, and I've seen you solve difficult math problems with ease." I think he was talking about my calculus I homework. "Are you a stalker?" "No, as I have already mentioned, I'm a potential employer, and to be forthright with you, I haven't prepared anything more than this. So do you mind if I get to the point?" "Sure," I nodded. "I'm from a place called the Down Under." "Australia?" Marek laughed. "It's a little like Australia, but imagine Australia if it were ruled by the terrible things in Tolkien's Middle-earth, or from the Forbidden Forest in Harry's fateful coming-of-age tale, a place in between the beginning and the end, not for the faint of heart. Everyone and everything you meet is out of your nightmares." "Okay, how—" "Even me," he said, cutting me off. "Even him, he looked like a fairly normal guy." I think he could sense my confusion. He then raised his right hand with an outstretched finger, gesturing towards a large shop window that had us both in its reflection. I looked the same, but Marek didn't. His reflection was a blurry, hulking figure, maybe 7 feet tall, with the unmistakable features of a faun, horns, fur, the works, except his eyes were gone, replaced with deep, black, empty sockets. His fur patchy, scarred, and missing in places, exposing raw, sinewy flesh. I felt like my blood froze solid. "Whoa," I finally said under my breath. "I've recently started a business. Customers are piling into the pipeline, but I need a human intern. I have some issues in the Down Under that only a human can solve." "For your customers?" He nodded. "I've figured out just how much money one can make by retrieving humans from the Down Under. Some humans here where you live have the means to write blank checks." "How do people get to the Down Under?" "They die, of course." I was still staring at Marek's reflection as he spoke. He noticed, raising his right hand and giving me a little wave in the reflection. I need a human to help bridge the worlds. I have limits, he continued. Listen, I can offer you a one-time opportunity to see the Down Under today, and then we can talk about the internship. Today? Right now, yes, a day's visit, but you must decide now. I'd get to see the Down Under and return here. Marek nodded. I considered his proposition for about 2 minutes. The allure of adventure was a little too tempting for a person who secretly wishes she received a Hogwarts acceptance letter when she turned 11. How would I get there? Marek smiled, then pulled out a small black travel bag, one you would carry your toothbrush and toiletries in if you were going out of town. As he unzipped it, small streaks of vibrant lights began to spill out. He rummaged around and pulled out a small vial filled with a luminescent liquid, then gave me instructions as he swirled it around, remixing whatever liquids had separated. Drink this, and you must die within 30 seconds to cross under temporarily. Then I'll find you. Within 30 seconds, are you? Marek was already in the midst of pulling out a long, glimmering blade from his jacket, an ancient-looking sword. For your head, it should be painless. Should be, I shot back. Marek nodded. I've never done it myself, but for others, they've told me it's painless. Fair answer, I remember thinking. I held the vial of liquid in my hands. It looked vile. What's it taste like? I asked hesitantly. You'll find out soon enough, he replied with a hint of mischief in his eyes. Bracing myself, I uncorked the vial and downed the liquid as a shot. The taste was absolutely horrendous, like animal urine mixed with the bitterness of strange medicinal herbs. I gagged, struggling to keep it down. I finally finished swallowing it, but it was too late. Marek's face had twisted into some state of panic. His form shimmered violently. Something was going terribly wrong. Wait, no, I didn't... His voice faltered, growing distant. You must die. His last words, sharp and urgent, hanging in the air as he vanished, dissolving like smoke in the wind. I was alone. I had just drank a strange liquid. The silence rushed in, cold and suffocating. My heart raced, drumming against my ribs. The reality of my situation crashed down on me. You must die. Marek's words echoed, but how? How was I supposed to die without him, without his guidance? What would happen in 30 seconds if I didn't die? My breaths turned into wheezes as my mind raced for a solution. I stood at the edge of town, outside the library, at a crosswalk alone. And I needed to die? I was very worried that if I didn't follow his directions, I don't know, it didn't sound like a good idea. My eyes darted around, desperate, and that's when I saw it. A truck, its headlights cutting through the twilight, barreling down the road. The truck was close, fast, and I could feel my pulse slowing in contrast to its roaring engine. I stopped breathing, focusing. This was it. There was no time to second guess. I leapt in front of it. The truck's blaring horn drowned out everything else as my world's end rushed toward me. I felt something. I think it was the impact. But it's not what I expected. It felt like a wave of jello washing over me. Then blackness. Ah! It was bone-chilling cold. I opened my eyes, gasping as frigid air filled my lungs. The air was thin. It took me multiple heaves to catch my breath. The sky was a burnt orange, but I didn't see a sun or source of light. I then realized I was high up on a cliff. Behind me was a forest of trees, a darker green than I have ever seen, almost black. I went to the cliff's edge and saw it. A twisted landscape of horrors. Hordes of rotting skeletons and monstrous beasts locked in violent struggles with humans, everywhere, as far as I could see. The air was thick with the sounds of gnashing teeth, clashing bones, and people dying. I shrunk back instinctively, pedaling backwards, trying to make myself invisible. I felt safe for the moment. But my God, I could see heads being ripped off, rotting skeletons stabbing humans as their prey with long spears. Where the hell am I? It took me a moment to remember the truck, to remember everything. Then I felt something approaching me. I turned. It was moving rapidly towards me. It was a shadowy, human-like figure, enveloped in a black mist. It stopped and knelt down in front of me. It stared at the ground as it held up something I'd never seen before. Some brown organic thing. It almost looked like a fruit. It gestured over and over for me to take it, but I was staring at the figure itself. I could see a white skull floating within the blackness. It gestured one more time aggressively. I just kept staring at its floating skull. The figure then screeched, launching the brown thing to the side, then pushed me down to the ground and jumped on me. Its hands started searching for my neck. It was on top of me. I could feel the pressure of its hands grasping my throat. I tried to fight back, but it was too strong. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't even think. Thwack! The shadowy figure took off flying into the air, landing 20 feet away. An arrow had pierced through its white skull. Then a voice called out, distant yet familiar. "Welcome to the Down Under." I scrambled to my feet and saw him, Marek, but not the human Marek I first met. He was fully transformed into what I saw in the window reflection, the same but in perfect clarity now, though I now noticed blood dripping from his black eye holes. Marek rode towards me in some sort of dune buggy, some grotesque contraption made of bones, some animal, some looked disturbingly human. On it was mounted a sort of crossbow. I couldn't tell how it was powered. I was shaking. I think it must have been from shock. Why would I ever agree to any of this? Marek slid up next to me, dismounting whatever it was with an eerie grace, leaving behind a crossbow in the driver's seat. "Arm," he said without preamble. "What?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Arm left or right, please." His voice was cool, almost businesslike, as if this is the most natural thing in the world. Unsure, I extended my left arm, trembling. In a flash, faster than I could process, Marek unsheathed the same blade he had as a human and made a precise cut across my skin. The sting was brief, the pain oddly muted, but blood started to rise in a slow, deliberate trickle. "Why?" I managed to ask, queasy at the sight of my small gash throbbing. "I need us both to remember how many times you've crossed over," Marek replied, as if it was obvious. "There's a limit," I press, more confused than ever. "It's theorized," he muttered, already distracted. Marek knelt over whatever he killed and began inspecting its remains. The hollow clattering of bones echoed as he rummaged through what was left of it. "They're further out than they used to be," he muttered, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Humans here used to have time to prepare. They had a chance." I couldn't help but ask, "Prepare for what?" Marek stuffed the skull into a worn sack, then tossed it casually into the back of his dune buggy thing. He turned to face me, his eyeless, bleeding black sockets looking directly into my eyes. "What do you think?" he asked, a grim smile tugging at his lips. I took another look out at the surreal, demonic landscape that surrounded us. I was dark, chaotic, and otherworldly. "Is this hell?" I asked. Marek shook his head. "No, far from it." He sighed, his shoulders slumping, and suddenly he looked weary, more vulnerable than before. "Listen, I fucked up," he admitted. "We're out of time. It's why I vanished in front of you. I had 8 minutes, and was supposed to have 8 hours. Another reason I need an intern." He paused, glancing around. "My math sucks." "What happens next?" I asked. "I need to work with Draven on these shitty doses of trissage." But I felt something was changing, like I was already leaving this new world behind. "I'll meet you at the library on Monday. I have to do the paperwork," Marek yelled, his voice trailing off into the blackness that took over my sight. "I haven't," I tried to yell back, but it was too late. Total blackness. Then I could hear the sounds of Grand Lake returning. The cars, the shops, the people. I opened my eyes. I was back, standing in the middle of the street, right in the place where the truck hit me. It almost felt like no time had passed. An involuntary shiver went down my spine. What the hell just happened to me? I held up my left forearm in the light. The precise little cut was still there. My arm was still bleeding. Then I thought about next Monday. Did I accept the job without realizing it? And what exactly had I gotten myself into? I woke up to an unsettling stillness. No noise from the street outside, no faint hum of traffic. It was too quiet. I rubbed my eyes, half expecting the usual chaos of the morning, the neighbor's dog barking, the faint hum of a lawnmower, my phone buzzing with messages from work. I live in a relatively small town filled with folks I know, but none of that happened. I brewed coffee as always, letting the warm aroma fill the air, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. I reached for my phone. No messages. Not a single notification. That was odd. Even the usual spam emails were missing. I checked the time, then the news. Scrolling through article after article. Nothing was new. No breaking headlines. No chatter. It was like the world had gone dark overnight. But still everything seems in place. I tried calling my brother. He checked in on me every few days, always pestering me to get out more, meet people, stop being such a hermit. But my call went straight to voicemail. That uneasy feeling was gnawing at me again, so I tried my mum next, hoping to hear her comforting voice. No answer. That's when I made the decision to head to her house. I didn't live with her anymore, but she'd always been my go-to when things felt off. She lived in a small neighborhood not far from where I was, just a quick drive across town. The streets were deserted as I drove, more so than usual. No kids playing, no cars passing by, not even a stray jogger. I passed houses with open doors and running cars in driveways, but no people. It was as if they had vanished, leaving everything behind in a rush. I made a joke to myself saying, "Did the apocalypse happen without me? Am I the only survivor?" I chuckled uneasily. When I arrived at my mum's house, it felt wrong. Her door was cracked open slightly. The TV inside was still on, but there was no sign of her. I stepped inside, my voice echoing through the empty rooms as I called out for her. Her knitting was laid out on the armchair like she'd just been there. A coffee cup, still half full, sat on the counter, but no matter how many rooms I checked, she was gone. I sat on the couch, feeling the weight of the silence press down on me. It wasn't just my mum. The whole neighborhood felt empty, and the more I thought about it, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that this was connected to my work. The dreams, the strange things I'd been seeing, people disappearing. The last few weeks had been intense at the lab. They were running an experiment, something high-level involving teleportation, maybe even dimensional rifts. I myself couldn't believe I was part of something this big. They say it could revolutionize everything we knew so far. But I wasn't told much. I didn't need to know. I was just there to keep the lights running. Just your regular guy trying to keep a roof over his head. But there had been a malfunction with one of the underground labs. Something had gone wrong, and they shut everything down. After that, I'd been having the strangest dreams where people would disappear into thin air. I left my mum's house with a heavy heart. I scribbled a quick note for her, hoping maybe she'd come back and find it, then drove to my brother's place. If anyone would know what was going on, it would be him. He was practical, always level-headed in a crisis. But when I got to his apartment, the door was unlocked, and it looked like he'd left in a hurry too. Half-eaten food and his phone sat on the kitchen counter with my number dialed in on it. Lights were still on, and his car was parked outside. He was gone, just like everyone else. I was starting to realize the truth. This wasn't just a coincidence. The strange dreams, the experiments at work. Something had happened, and I was in the middle of it, but I still didn't fully understand. Then I saw them. It was just a flicker of movement at first, something out of the corner of my eye. I pulled the car over and grabbed the binoculars I kept stashed in the glove compartment. My hands were shaking as I scanned the horizon, and then I saw them, people, standing in the distance, near the edge of a large open field. It wasn't a large crowd, maybe 5 or 6, but they were there. My heart raced. Finally, other people. I waved, desperate for a response, but none of them waved back. They stood there, clustered together, looking around nervously. Something wasn't right. I focused the binoculars, studying them more closely. They weren't just watching me. They were on edge, shifting uncomfortably, whispering to each other. One man kept glancing over his shoulder, like he was ready to run at any moment. I stepped out of the car, raising my hand again to get their attention, but their unease only deepened. One by one, they started backing away, moving further from the field's edge as I approached. It felt wrong the way they were retreating, like they were afraid of me. I took a single step forward, and that's when it happened. One of the women disappeared. She didn't run or hide. She just vanished, right there in front of me. The space where she'd stood was suddenly empty. The others saw it too, and their panic spread. In a moment of confusion, I stepped closer again while my hands still in the air. Then it happened again. One of them vanished again. The others that was left turned and bolted, trying to get away as fast as they could, but it was too late. One by one, they all disappeared, fading from existence with every step I took closer. I suddenly froze. My mind reeled as I dropped the binoculars, the world spinning around me. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't some strange phenomenon happening to everyone. It was happening because of me. I felt sick. The experiments at work, the malfunction, the strange dreams, they weren't just in my head. I was the one causing this. Whatever cosmic force they had tapped into on that lab during those experiments had changed me, turned me into some kind of walking black hole. People disappeared when I got too close. I staggered back to the car, my heart pounding. The notes I had seen earlier started making sense now. Don't come closer. You're not alone, but you need to stay away. They weren't warnings to me, they were warnings about me. I thought about my mum, my brother, everyone I had been near. Had I caused them to vanish too? The guilt was overwhelming. I had come to them, hoping to find safety, but all I had done was destroy them without even knowing it. I sank into the driver's seat, staring at the empty field where those people had been just moments ago. The weight of it all crashed down on me. The government experiment, the strange energy we'd been messing with, it had done something to me, something irreversible. And now I was alone. It wasn't the world collapsing, it wasn't the apocalypse. It was me. I was the cause of this. The strange cosmic force we had tapped into had made me a walking void, erasing anyone within a certain radius. All this time I had thought I was just trying to survive, but I was the one wiping everyone out. The clock had just struck 9:30 p.m. as Eric and I walked down the fog-filled streets, our jackets zipped tight against the night's chill. The city was unusually quiet, the mist swallowing sound and muting the neon lights that flickered above closed storefronts. I stuffed my hands deeper into my pockets, the anticipation building inside me. It was Eric's idea to come out here, to find the infamous diner that only opened at night. I wasn't convinced it was a good idea, but curiosity gnawed at me. "What's the deal with this place again?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, though I couldn't say why. Maybe it was the fog, or the unsettling silence around us. Eric shot me a grin, his breath visible in the cold air. "Rumor has it the diner opens at exactly 10 p.m. and closes before dawn. Some people say it's older than the city itself." He paused for effect. "And of course the rules." The rules. That's what everyone talked about. Online forums, late-night campus discussions, and even random whispers at parties. The 10 p.m. diner's rules were legendary, each more bizarre than the last. Yet despite all the speculation, no one seemed to know why they existed or who enforced them. Some said it was just a quirky tradition to attract business. Others hinted at something darker, a power that the diner held over its patrons. "You think it's just a gimmick?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Probably," Eric replied. "But isn't that part of the fun? Come on, where's your sense of adventure?" I forced a smile, more to convince myself than him. The idea of the rules didn't sit right with me. But then again, how weird could a diner really be? We turned a corner, and the building came into view. It sat at the end of a darkened alleyway, wedged between two ancient brick structures. "There it is," Eric said, nodding toward the dim glow ahead. The diner's facade was cracked and faded, its windows fogged up from the warmth inside. The only sign of life was a flickering neon sign above the entrance, casting a sickly yellow light onto the wet pavement. As we approached, I noticed a faint outline of people through the grime-streaked glass. My stomach tightened. "You ready?" Eric asked, grabbing the door handle. I hesitated for a split second, glancing at the street behind us. The fog seemed thicker now, swallowing everything in its path. It felt like the world was closing in on us. I took a deep breath and nodded. "Yeah, let's do this." Eric pulled the door open, and we stepped inside. A wave of warm, stale air hit me, carrying with it the scent of old leather, coffee, and a faint hint of something metallic. The interior was dimly lit, casting long shadows across the checkered floor. I scanned the room, trying to get my bearings. Booths lined the walls, their red leather cushions cracked and worn with age. A long counter stretched out on the opposite side, stools with torn fabric tops lined up neatly. There were a few customers scattered around, a man sitting by himself staring at the window, an elderly couple whispering over their cups, and a lone woman with her back to us, spooning sugar into her drink in a slow, methodical manner. But what struck me the most was how still everything seemed. The other patrons barely moved, their actions sluggish, like they were part of some strange, slow-motion dream. I glanced at Eric, who appeared to have noticed it too. His usual bravado seemed to wane slightly as we walked toward an empty booth in the center of the room. The seats squeaked under our weight as we sat down. Eric, always one for theatrics, leaned forward and whispered, "Okay, this place is officially creepy." "Yeah, no kidding," I replied, my eyes scanning the room again. Something about the diner made my skin crawl, but I couldn't put my finger on it. It was as if the place itself was watching us. Our conversation was interrupted by the silent arrival of a waitress. She appeared seemingly out of nowhere, placing 2 menus on the table without so much as a word. Her movements were smooth, almost robotic, and she left as quickly as she had come. Eric raised an eyebrow at me, clearly unnerved. "Well, that was something," he muttered. "Guess we're not getting the warm and friendly service tonight." I picked up the menu. My curiosity piqued. It felt old, the plastic cover worn and sticky to the touch. Then I noticed the writing on the front. Bold, black letters spelling out "House Rules." Beneath the title was a list of numbered instructions, each one stranger than the last. Rule 1. Never sit facing the entrance unless you are the first customer to arrive. Rule 2. Never greet the staff when they approach, only speak when spoken to. Rule 3. If a stranger joins your table uninvited, offer them a sip of your drink, then excuse yourself to the restroom. Return only when the diner clock chimes. Rule 4. If you hear soft humming while eating, immediately close your eyes and wait for the humming to stop. Rule 5. If a waiter drops something, you must turn away and not look at them until they leave your table. Rule 6. If you hear your name whispered from behind, do not turn around. Pretend you did not hear it. Rule 7. Should your utensil fall, leave it there. Do not bend down to pick it up, or you risk seeing something under the table that shouldn't be there. Rule 8. If you hear footsteps following you as you leave, do not turn around. Slow your pace until the sound fades away. I read through the list twice, each rule more unsettling than the one before. My mouth went dry as I realized how specific they were. These weren't rules for a quaint diner experience. They were warnings. My eyes darted back to Rule 1. Never sit facing the entrance unless you are the first customer to arrive. A chill ran down my spine as I glanced over my shoulder at the glass door. "Look at this," Eric whispered, pointing at Rule 4. "If you hear soft humming while eating, close your eyes." What is this place, a haunted house? I forced a laugh, but my heart wasn't in it. "It's probably just some elaborate gimmick," I said, trying to convince myself, to get people talking. "Yeah, right," Eric replied, his voice tinged with skepticism. "Well, we came here for the experience. Let's just roll with it." He looked at me, waiting for some kind of agreement. I nodded, feeling a tight knot of anxiety form in my chest. We flipped open the menus and pretended to browse the food options, though neither of us really had an appetite. My eyes kept drifting back to the rules, especially Rule 1. "Wait," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We weren't the first ones here, and—" I trailed off, glancing at the door. Through the grimy glass, something moved. I couldn't make it out clearly, just a dark silhouette shifting in and out of the foggy night. It was tall, unnaturally so, and seemed to sway as it stood there. I blinked, trying to focus, but it faded into the darkness. "What?" Eric asked, leaning forward. "What did you see?" "There's something out there," I muttered, not taking my eyes off the door. I don't know what it was, but it looked— "Don't mess with me," he interrupted, his voice strained. "This place is already creepy enough." "I'm not messing with you," I snapped, turning back to face him. "I swear I saw something." We both went silent, the unease between us growing thicker. The rules weren't a joke. I was sure of it now. This place had its own set of laws, its own way of operating, and we were already violating one. The tension between us grew thicker with each passing second. I kept glancing at the entrance, scanning for any sign of movement through the glass. My mind replayed the brief glimpse of that shadowy figure I had seen outside, and an icy fear gripped my chest. Eric shifted nervously across from me, tapping his fingers on the table. We sat there in silence, waiting. The waitress reappeared, sliding up to our table without a sound, her hollow eyes staring straight through us. My skin crawled at the sight of her. Remembering Rule 2, I bit my tongue and stared at the menu in front of me, resisting the urge to greet her or even acknowledge her presence. Eric's eyes widened as if he had to force himself to stay quiet. After a long, unsettling pause, the waitress finally spoke, her voice monotone and distant. "What would you like to order?" She didn't ask it like a question, more like a command. The words felt cold and wrong, echoing strangely in the air around us. It was as if the sound didn't belong in this place. Eric coughed and glanced at me, seeking some form of validation. I nodded subtly, indicating he should answer first. He took a deep breath and said, "I'll have a black coffee and pancakes." His voice trembled slightly, but he managed to get the words out. The waitress turned her gaze to me, her eyes boring into mine like a predator assessing its prey. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to meet her eyes for only a moment before I replied, "Same for me, please." She didn't react, didn't even blink. She just scribbled something onto her notepad and turned to leave. As she walked away, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, as though a great weight had lifted off my chest. I exhaled slowly, my heartbeat gradually returning to a more regular rhythm. "That was weird," Eric muttered, breaking the silence between us. "Did you see how she looked at us?" I nodded, rubbing my hands together to warm them. "Yeah, like she was judging us for even being here," I replied, keeping my voice low. And the way she spoke, it was like she didn't care what we ordered, almost like it didn't matter. We sat in silence for a few minutes, staring at each other, too afraid to voice the questions racing through our minds. We both knew something wasn't right. This place felt wrong, like it was bending reality in subtle ways, making us question our perceptions. After what felt like an eternity, the waitress returned with our orders. She placed the coffee cups and plates in front of us with meticulous precision, her movements almost robotic. "Enjoy your meal," she intoned before turning on her heel and drifting back to the shadows. "Did you hear that?" Eric whispered, leaning closer to me. "She said enjoy your meal. It's like she was forcing herself to say it." I nodded, my eyes locked on the steaming cup of coffee in front of me. I had an overwhelming urge to down the coffee and leave, to get as far away from this diner as possible. But something inside me, perhaps morbid curiosity, kept me rooted in my seat. I picked up my fork and prodded at the pancakes, watching the syrup ooze slowly down the sides. Then it started. A soft, melodic humming filled the air around us. My heart skipped a beat as I remembered Rule 4. If you hear soft humming while eating, immediately close your eyes and wait for the humming to stop. "Eric," I hissed, grabbing his wrist. His eyes widened in alarm as he too began to hear the sound. "Close your eyes, now." "What?" he stammered, his fork frozen in midair. "Just do it," I snapped, shutting my own eyes tightly. I heard Eric mutter a curse before he followed suit. The humming grew louder, swelling into a haunting lullaby that reverberated through my skull. It was everywhere, in the air, in my ears, inside my own head. My grip on the fork tightened until my knuckles turned white. I kept my eyes squeezed shut, trying to focus on anything but the unnerving sound. I felt a cold presence sweep through the room, like a gust of wind in an enclosed space. My skin prickled, and the air grew thick and suffocating. Every instinct screamed at me to open my eyes, to look at what was happening around us, but I knew that would break the rule. I had to stay still. I had to endure. The humming seemed to circle our table, changing in pitch and rhythm as if it was studying us, trying to coax us into making a mistake. My breathing grew ragged, my chest tightening with fear. I wanted to reach out to Eric, to feel some form of connection, but I was too afraid to move. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, the humming ceased. I held my breath, waiting, listening. I heard Eric's shaky breathing beside me, but no other sound disturbed the air. "It's over," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I think we can open our eyes now." I hesitated, then slowly cracked my eyes open. The diner was exactly as it had been before, but it felt different, colder, darker. I glanced at Eric, who looked as pale as a ghost. His eyes were wide, darting around the room in a panic. "Did you feel that?" he asked, his voice trembling. It was like something was right here. "Yeah," I replied, my mouth dry. I glanced at the other patrons, expecting to see them staring at us, judging us for our fear, but they all sat motionless, eating their meals as if nothing had happened. I glanced down at my plate, my appetite completely gone. The pancakes looked wrong somehow, grayer, like the color had drained from them. I pushed the plate away, my stomach churning. "Let's get out of here," Eric muttered, his eyes darting nervously to the entrance. "I don't care about the rules anymore. I want to leave." I opened my mouth to agree when the waitress returned, appearing silently at the edge of our table. My heart nearly stopped. "Rule 2. I reminded myself. "Don't speak unless spoken to." I clamped my mouth shut and waited, my heart pounding in my ears. "Would you like anything else?" she asked, her voice devoid of emotion. I shook my head, avoiding her gaze. She lingered for a moment, her presence sending a chill down my spine, before turning away and gliding back to the counter. "Okay, that's it," Eric whispered harshly. "We're leaving, now." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. As we prepared to stand up, I glanced at the menu again, my eyes catching the list of rules. Rule 8 loomed in my mind like a warning. If you hear footsteps following you as you leave, do not turn around. Slow your pace until the sound fades away. We weren't done yet. The worst was yet to come. Eric stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, cutting through the oppressive silence that hung in the diner. A sense of dread washed over me. There was a nagging feeling that we were far from done with this place. Eric reached for his wallet, tossing a few bills onto the table. "Let's just go," he muttered under his breath, his eyes wide and darting toward the entrance. He wanted out, and so did I. We started walking toward the door, the air around us seeming to thicken with every step. My legs felt heavy, as though I were wading through mud. The soft clinking of cutlery and hushed murmurs of the other patrons filled the space, but my senses were hyper-focused on our escape. Then, just as we were a few feet from the door, I heard it, the distinct scrape of a chair behind us. My heart dropped. Someone had joined our table. I glanced at Eric, whose face had gone ghostly white. "Oh no," he whispered, barely audible over the diner's eerie ambience. "Rule 3? Slowly I turned back to look. There, sitting in my seat, was a tall, lanky figure. The man wore an old-fashioned suit, the kind you'd see in pictures from decades past. His head was bent forward, his hair hanging over his face like a dark curtain, obscuring his features. A wave of cold swept over me. The atmosphere around him felt wrong, as if he didn't belong in this world. "We have to follow the rule," I hissed at Eric, trying to keep my voice steady. "Get back to the table, now!" With reluctance, we approached the stranger. He remained utterly still, his head angled forward as if studying something invisible on the table. The room seemed to grow darker, colder, the air pressing down on my chest. My palms were slick with sweat, and I could feel my pulse pounding in my throat. I grabbed my cup of coffee, my hand trembling, and placed it in front of the stranger. "Here," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. "Have a sip." His hand moved in slow, deliberate motions as he reached for the cup. His fingers were unnaturally long and thin, with skin that seemed almost translucent. He lifted the cup to his lips, taking a slow, deliberate sip. A chill crawled up my spine, and I fought the urge to look away. "Restroom," I croaked, nudging Eric. "We need to go." Eric nodded, his eyes locked on the stranger. We backed away from the table, careful not to break eye contact until we reached the restroom door. The moment we were inside, we both exhaled, as though we had just come up for air after being submerged in dark water. "What the hell was that?" Eric rasped, clutching the edge of the sink. "Who was that guy?" "I don't know," I replied, my voice shaky. But we had to follow the rule. Now we wait until the clock chimes. Seconds felt like minutes as we stood there, listening to our own ragged breaths echoing in the tiny room. My mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. The air was stifling, pressing down on us as if the diner itself was alive, watching our every move. Then, the cafe clock outside began to chime. 1, 2, 3 chimes. We exchanged a glance, swallowing the lump of fear lodged in our throats. It was time to return. As we stepped out of the restroom, we dared to approach the table. It was empty. The stranger was gone, leaving only our 2 cups and the uneaten plates of pancakes behind. I exhaled shakily, but my relief was short-lived. As we turned back toward the entrance, something metallic clattered against the floor. I froze. My fork had fallen, clinking loudly as it hit the ground, spinning a few times before settling just under the table. I felt my heart leap into my throat. Rule 7. Should your utensil fall, leave it there. Do not bend down to pick it up, or you risk seeing something under the table that shouldn't be there. Leave it, I whispered urgently to Eric, who was staring wide-eyed at the fork. Don't look under the table. He nodded, but his eyes were wide with fear. I could feel the tension radiating off him, his body rigid and tense. We were both aware of what Rule 7 warned us about, and yet the urge to look was almost unbearable, like an itch in the back of my mind that I couldn't scratch. Then we heard it, a soft, muffled sound coming from beneath the table. My blood ran cold. It was the faint, heart-wrenching sobs of a child, crying softly in the darkness beneath us. My stomach twisted violently, and I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. Don't listen, I muttered through clenched teeth, my eyes fixed on a point far away. It's not real, just focus. The crying grew louder, more desperate, echoing in the small space of the diner. It was the kind of sound that clawed at your heart, demanding your attention. Tears welled up in my eyes, not from sadness but from sheer terror. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to drown out the noise, but the cries persisted, coming in waves of anguish and despair, each one stronger than the last. Eric shifted uncomfortably beside me. It's just a trick, he whispered, more to himself than to me. We can't look. We can't. The cries turned into words, garbled and barely recognizable, but unmistakably pleading. Please, help me. The voice tugged at the deepest recesses of my sympathy, igniting an instinct to look, to bend down and see who or what was under there. I clenched my fists so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. It's not real, I repeated, my voice trembling. It's just trying to make us look. The crying continued, now mixed with small, shuffling sounds like tiny feet dragging across the floor. My skin crawled, every nerve screaming for me to glance down and see what was beneath the table. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality, the line between what was real and what wasn't blurring under the pressure of the noise. Then, a tiny hand wrapped around the leg of my chair. I stiffened, my muscles locking up in paralyzing fear. It gripped tightly, almost urgently, as though begging me to help. My heart raced so fast I thought it might burst, my breath coming out in short, panicked gasps. Don't look, I hissed to Eric, fighting the urge to jump up and run. It's not real. The grip on my chair tightened, and the crying turned into a pitiful wail. My eyes burned from the effort of not looking down, of not acknowledging the nightmare unfolding beneath us. I could feel my sanity teetering on the edge, about to break. And then, as abruptly as it had started, it stopped. The hand released its grip, the crying faded into silence, and the air around us returned to its suffocating stillness. I dared to glance at Eric, who was pale and shaking, his eyes wide and haunted. Did you see that? He croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, swallowing hard. Yeah, but we didn't look under the table, we followed the rule. He exhaled shakily, his hand still gripping the edge of the table. Let's get out of here, he muttered, his voice strained. I can't take this anymore. Agreed, I replied, feeling a wave of nausea wash over me. We stood up slowly, careful not to glance under the table as we backed away. I couldn't help but notice that the rest of the diner continued on as if nothing had happened. The patrons still eating, the waitress still standing behind the counter with her hollow stare. We started toward the exit, moving cautiously. As we reached the door, I heard it, a faint, distant whisper of footsteps following us. My body tensed, remembering Rule 8. If you hear footsteps following you as you leave, do not turn around. Slow your pace until the sound fades away. "Don't turn around," I warned Eric, my voice strained. "Just walk slowly." We moved forward, each step heavy with fear as the footsteps echoed behind us. I fought every instinct to look back, to see what was trailing us. But I knew if we did, we'd break the rule, and whatever awaited us on the other side of that broken rule would be far worse than anything we had encountered so far. The door was just a few feet away. My hand reached out, grasping the cold handle, and I pushed it open. The footsteps stopped as we crossed the threshold into the foggy night. I turned to Eric, both of us breathing heavily, our faces pale and drawn. "Let's go," I muttered, my voice barely holding together, "and never come back." We hurried down the street, the diner's oppressive aura fading behind us. Neither of us spoke, too afraid of what we might say, of what might still be lingering in the air around us. As we rounded the corner, I chanced a final glance back. The diner stood silent, its dim neon sign flickering in the fog. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadow at the window staring out, watching us. I looked away and quickened my pace. Whatever had happened in there, I knew one thing for certain: we were never coming back. I don't know where to start. I live on my family's 250-acre property. Being a farm, it's pretty open with rolling fields surrounding my home, except to the left of my house where there's a small 2-acre woods. It took me a while to check it out, even though growing up I was always running through the woods wherever we lived. Since this particular wood's so thick, I never spent much time in it. But one day I decided to explore. I grabbed my machete, knowing it would be a slow trek, cutting down various plants and vines out of my way. I had made a complete circle around the outside of the woods instead of going through the center, which was full of vines and poison ivy. I had almost made it back to my starting point until I was stopped in my tracks. Sitting in front of me in a small clearing was an old, dirty mattress. I remember audibly saying, "What the fuck?" when I got close enough to see. Even worse, next to the mattress were two things, an old stuffed rabbit doll and a bowl full of water. While it obviously creeped me out being in the woods alone, with nothing but a now dull machete from hacking down various plants, eventually my curiosity got the better of me. I got closer and closer, almost chuckling at my reaction to what, albeit creepy, looked abandoned. Still, something seemed off, and I could feel a pit growing in my stomach. That's when I looked up. I had been so focused on the mattress itself that I didn't even notice it was pointed directly towards my house. The weeds in front of the mattress had been lightly trimmed, not enough to notice any difference against the thick backdrop of the woods, but just enough to see my home. I was feeling uneasy and decided it best not to dwell on it too long. Probably just a spot some teenagers used to hang out on an old mattress, I thought to myself, no doubt trying to ignore the multitude of questions flowing through my mind. Why would someone clear the weeds to have a direct view of my house? Why wouldn't someone throw the mattress away? Why put it in the woods right off the edge? All these questions were an obvious distraction to the thought that was slowly growing on my subconscious. Is someone watching me? By the time I got back to my house, I was almost laughing at myself for the stupidity of it. You really think you're interesting enough for someone to watch you? What are the chances someone is actually watching me? Eventually, the mattress fully left my mind while I got distracted watching TV. Still, I never felt completely comfortable knowing that old, dirty mattress was just sitting in the woods next to my home. Every day when I got home from work, I would look towards the woods in passing, and each time I passed by, I got an almost uneasy feeling. Being on a farm in the middle of nowhere, it's almost pitch black at night except for the light on my front porch that was turned on by a motion sensor that you had to get pretty close to for it to turn on. One night, while getting home from work pretty late, I got out of my truck and grabbed my keys to lock it. That's when I saw it. As my headlights illuminated the woods in front of me for a split second, two dots reflected back towards me. They almost looked like eyes. but were too big and spread apart to be a person's eyes, and I convinced myself that I had been seeing things. When I tried clicking the lock button again, my headlights illuminated the woods once more, and I saw nothing. I went inside, feeling a little better, letting the thoughts slowly float away from my mind. If only I had known what I know now, maybe I wouldn't have been so calm. I should have called the cops, but can you blame me? If there really was someone there, they would have no doubt been gone the moment they saw a cop car pull up, and all that would have been found was an old mattress in the woods. While certainly creepy, I doubt the police would have given any serious thought to it. I should have done something, anything, because no matter how much I tried, I still couldn't get the idea out of my head. Someone was watching me from the woods, but I would never be able to confirm it. The moment I would go to investigate, the person could have run upon seeing me coming. I wish I would have thought of something, but I tried my best to just ignore it. A few months had passed, and the idea that someone was watching me had escaped my mind. At some point, my friend Ryan, who had been living with me, decided to make a dirt bike track through the woods. I showed him the mattress one day while we were walking through the woods, and he just laughed. For one reason or another, Ryan didn't share the same feelings I had towards the mattress. We grabbed an old machine from the barn with a bucket on the front and lifted the mattress into it. We took it back to the barn and threw it away in the dumpster. I remember a feeling of relief when we left it in the dumpster. Ryan slowly worked on the track, going back and forth from the machine to his dirt bike, tweaking every turn, jump and straightaway until, after a few months, he had finished what actually turned out to be a pretty nice and fun track. Running through the woods. It had a few twists and turns going around trees and clearings he had made with the old tractor. Hearing him ride around on his bike and then the sound of an old diesel engine starting up had grown so familiar to me on the weekends that I would almost forget the sounds were even happening. God, how I miss those sounds. Hey, I'm gonna go work on the track. I think I'm almost finished with it. It's going to be awesome, Ryan said on another Saturday morning. I'd gotten so used to him disappearing into the woods weekend after weekend that it had almost become second nature. So much so that I didn't even notice as the time rolled around to 11 p.m. that day. I hadn't seen Ryan in a while. I didn't even realize that the noise I had been so accustomed to over the last few weeks was also missing. I stepped outside to a silent, chilly night to check on where Ryan had gone. His truck was still parked next to the house, as were mine and my girlfriend's vehicles. The old tractor was still sitting behind the house, just in front of the opening that led into the woods following the track. It looked like a deep, dark abyss with the faint light I could see coming off of the moon. I knew going in there alone at this time of night was the last thing I was going to do, so I resorted to every other option I could think of. I checked the barn where we kept the old tractors and found nothing but a calm breeze and crickets in the night singing. I checked the other houses that were on the property for the people who worked on the farm, hoping he had maybe gone over to one of them. Still, I found no sign of Ryan or his dirt bike. I tried calling his phone a few more times before giving up. After hearing his voicemail one last time, I knew there was only one thing left to do. So I grabbed the only flashlight I could find, one of those old-style bulb flashlights that was barely bright and made everything have a yellow tint to it. After taking a few more deep breaths and desperately trying to think of any other possible place he could be, I finally made my way towards the deep, dark, almost tunnel-like opening that led into the woods. I walked around the entire layout of the track for what felt like an eternity, even though it had only been 45 minutes. I almost started to feel relieved that I could walk out of this dark, seemingly endless forest and think of another place to find him. Still, I had to look one last time. As I rounded the third pin turn, something caught my eye. Just past the turn, lying on its side in the weeds, I saw something that looked like plastic and was red in color. My heart dropped when all the ideas ran through my head. What if he's out there hurt? What if he had been waiting for me for hours with various broken bones? Or worse, what if it was too late? What if one of my best friends died because I was too scared to go out into a small patch of woods right next to the safety of my own home? I pushed the thoughts out of my head while starting to move closer to the bike, hoping I'd find a possibly injured but at least alive friend. What I found in a weird way was so much worse. Lying down on its side was Ryan's dirt bike, with the same stickers that he had put all over it. But no Ryan. I searched everywhere I could, hoping he had maybe tried to crawl back to the house, but I couldn't find a single sign of him. Not in the woods, not near my home, not anywhere. It was almost like he had vanished. Against my better judgment, I went back into the woods, hoping to find some sort of clue. And while I somewhat found what I was looking for, it didn't make me feel any better or answer the biggest question going through my mind. Where the hell are you, Ryan? As I got closer to the bike, it looked seemingly normal. It was dirty, but that was to be expected on something with dirt in the name. I tried my best not to move it while searching for clues. I was looking closely at the side facing the ground when I noticed something. Sticking out of the back tire was a small piece of metal. I soon realized it was a nail sticking out of the tire, something that wasn't unusual on a farm. But then I kept looking. There were maybe 15 or 20 nails all along the back tire, far too many for it to be a coincidence. I checked the front tire and found the same 20 or so nails sticking out from it also. Obviously something had happened here, but I wasn't going to be the one to find out what. So I ran out of the woods as fast as I could before calling 911. The police showed up maybe 15 minutes later. That was one positive to living in a small town. The police were never too far away. The cops searched the woods, brought out K9 units and everything, but they couldn't find a single sign of Ryan anywhere. We'll open a missing persons investigation in the morning, but for now, try to get some sleep. We'll find your friend soon, I'm sure of it, said Officer Langley, the first cop to show up on the scene and the last one to leave. His words were almost comforting in a way, like we might actually find Ryan wherever he may be. A few more months had passed, and Ryan was still missing. The police search was slowly fading out of anyone's mind, and I felt Ryan may soon join all those other missing people who were never found. Every few weeks, in the bright sunshine Florida is known for, I would walk around the track. It was almost meditation for me. Maybe I thought I might find something that would lead me to Ryan or where he went, but that never happened. By this time, the track had slightly overgrown with fresh green weeds, except for the small trail I would leave behind me, walking around those woods. I missed Ryan, but knew I couldn't dwell on it forever. In the back of my mind, I thought I would never know what really happened that day, until I saw it. Lying in those damned woods on the ground, just off what now resembled a walking trail, was that old, dirty, fucking mattress. The feeling I got this time was almost revolting. I know we threw that mattress away. How the hell could it possibly be here in the woods? Why did it take so long for it to back up? By now it should be 10 feet deep, buried under piles of garbage. I don't know what to do. I just had to sit down and write everything down the best I could remember it all. I don't know if I'll ever post this, but I can't get this uneasy feeling out of my stomach no matter what I try. P.S. I wrote this a few weeks ago. I never thought it would see the light of day, but things have gotten so much worse. I can't explain it right now, but I knew that before I explain what is happening right now, I'd need to give some backstory. I will update as soon as I can. When I was 12, my parents moved us to a small town in the middle of nowhere. My new school was tiny, the kids were all friendly, and the town itself was picturesque, except for one thing, the house at the end of Willow Lane. It wasn't like any house I'd ever seen. It loomed behind a tangled maze of overgrown trees and a wrought iron gate rusted from years of neglect. The house looked ancient, with faded brickwork, broken windows, and a porch that seemed one step away from collapsing. No one ever went near it, and the townsfolk would change the subject whenever it came up in conversation. Naturally, my curiosity got the better of me. I would walk past the house every day on my way home from school, always peering through the gaps in the fence. One October afternoon, as the wind howled and leaves rustled, I noticed something odd, light flickering inside the house. I tried to convince myself it was just the shadows playing tricks, but the flicker grew into a distinct, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat. That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. My mind raced with thoughts of what I might find if I dared to investigate. The following evening, the flickering light was back. This time, I decided to take action. I waited until dark, grabbed a flashlight, and sneaked out. As I approached the gate, the chill in the air seemed to grow thicker, almost palpable. With a pounding heart, I pushed open the gate. It creaked loudly, echoing through the silent night. The front door was ajar, just enough for me to slip inside. I entered cautiously, my flashlight cutting through the gloom. The interior was just as decrepit as the outside, filled with dusty furniture draped in white sheets. I followed the light through the darkened rooms, guided by its relentless pulse. It led me to a door at the end of a narrow hallway. The flickering was intense now, like a strobe light. I hesitated, but then pushed the door open. Inside, there was a single, small room. In the center was an old-fashioned gramophone, its needle jumping wildly on a record that was spinning faster than it should have been. The room was otherwise empty, but the walls were covered in strange symbols scratched into the peeling paint. As I approached the gramophone, I felt a sudden, oppressive weight on my chest. My flashlight flickered and went out. Panic surged through me, and I fumbled with the flashlight, trying to turn it back on. Just then, I heard a whisper, soft, almost imperceptible, coming from behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, and I realized it was coming from the gramophone. The needle had stopped, but the whispering continued, growing more frantic. I could make out words now. "Come closer. Find me." A cold draft swept through the room, and I felt a presence, cold and malevolent, brushing against my skin. I could see my breath in the air, and the symbols on the walls seemed to writhe and change. I had to get out. I bolted for the door, but it slammed shut behind me. Heart racing, I tried to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. The whispering was now a cacophony of voices, and I could hear footsteps approaching from the darkness. My flashlight flickered back on, but the beam was weak and feeble. In a desperate attempt, I kicked the door, and it finally gave way. I ran through the house, through the tangled mess of rooms, and out into the night. I didn't stop until I was safely home. To this day, I can't explain what I saw or heard in that house. I never went back, and neither did anyone else. The house remained empty, a looming, silent testament to something sinister that should never have been disturbed. But every so often, when the wind is just right, I can still hear the faint sound of the gramophone, playing its eerie, unending tune, calling, whispering, and waiting. Many people are afraid of spiders or heights. My phobia is a fairly common one as well. You see, I am afraid of clowns. When I say I'm afraid of clowns, I really mean it. I can barely even look at the most benevolent clown for more than 10 minutes without screaming and crying. Trying to watch any killer clown horror movie would probably cause my premature death. That being said, I'll tell you about the time that I tried confronting my fear. I doubt telling you this story will help me get over my fear of clowns. However, it might make you afraid of them. So don't continue reading if you don't want another phobia in your life. The story goes as follows. A couple of months ago, I was enjoying the weekend with a friend in his house. Only he and his cat live there. So his house is pretty much the perfect hangout place. We were playing video games while my friend's cat was curled up in my lap. Usually cats hate me, but Bob always had a soft spot for me. He loves to follow me around everywhere I go. He especially loves when I use his fuzzy back as an armrest. After a couple of hours, we decided to buy some whiskey and coke from the nearby supermarket. We quickly exited the house and walked towards the supermarket, which was only around 3 minutes away. Unfortunately, our trip wasn't as simple as I originally anticipated. Standing right next to the supermarket, we saw the one thing that makes my blood run cold: a clown. A panic attack hit me as soon as I saw the clown, even though every clown creeps me out. There was just something about this one that made me extremely uncomfortable. He looked like a Ronald McDonald copy, although a very bad copy. The clown was sickly slim and short. His costume had many rips and tears. The makeup on his face was horribly done. It was so awful that his face looked like someone threw a couple of buckets of random paint on it. Even though the clown's appearance alone was frightening enough to ruin my day, what scared me the most was the way he looked at me. Even from a distance, I could tell that he was staring straight into my eyes. He was smiling so hard that it looked like the skin on his face will get ripped off by his unnatural smile. Worst of all, he wouldn't stop smiling at all. His smile seemed to widen with every passing second. At this point, I was completely frozen in place. My friend tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Let's just go and grab the drinks. You don't have to look at that weirdo." I somehow powered through my panic attack and said, "Sure, but I'm going to stare at the bastard. Can't be a coward forever. It's about damn time I try doing something about my problem." My friend gave me a reassuring look and replied with a simple, "All right." Another even more potent panic attack hit me as soon as I took only 2 steps towards the clown. I started crying, embarrassed. I barely mustered the strength to tell my friend that I'm going back to the apartment. I speed walked back to the house. I collapsed on the couch in tears as soon as I entered. Bob rushed to cheer me up by jumping on top of my back and purring. It didn't take more than 30 minutes for my friend to return. He was proudly carrying 2 bags full of drinks and snacks like they were trophies. He put the bags on the nearby table, then cheerily he started talking. "You know, that clown wasn't that bad. One guy gave him some money and then he..." Before he finished his sentence, annoyed and exhausted, I said, "Please, let's just drink. I don't want to hear about it." He nodded understandingly and went to grab the whiskey glasses. Hours passed. After some time of heavy drinking, we fell asleep on the couch. It wasn't an enjoyable nap for me, because a nightmare involving the supermarket clown, which I would rather not describe, woke me up. I groggily went to the spare bedroom, but before going to bed, I realized that neither of us locked the front door. Who knows how long we were asleep? It's not like this is a crime-free neighborhood. Anyone could have entered the house. I walked as fast as I could towards the front door. I checked it, and as expected, it wasn't locked, so I immediately locked it. I reassured myself that no intruder entered the house. Then I went to bed. While lying in bed, morbid thoughts started attacking my mind. What if someone entered the house? What if the clown we saw earlier followed my friend home and is waiting for the opportunity to surprise us? The sequence of disturbing thoughts was instantly stopped by the sound of soft meowing. I was shocked to hear meowing coming from under my bed, but that shock was immediately replaced by a feeling of relief. Even though Bob was just a cat, knowing he's here to protect me while I try to sleep was oddly putting my mind to rest. After some time of rolling around in bed, I finally fell asleep to the sounds of soft meowing and purring. I woke up early next morning. Considering my paranoia from last night, the sleep itself wasn't too bad. I found my friend playing with Bob in the living room. I immediately told him Bob's a real lifesaver. If it wasn't for him, it would have been damn near impossible for me to get some sleep last night. He looked at me in confusion and asked, "What you mean?" "Bob was keeping me company. He slept under my bed last night," I said with a smile. "Nah, he was here with me. He slept right next to the couch." My friend immediately rebutted. "I heard him meowing in my room," I responded. "I know Bob thinks you're cool and all, but he always sleeps next to me. It's like a ritual of ours, you see." He stopped mid-sentence. His calm demeanor was rapidly substituted by absolute fear. "Please just trust me, follow me, and don't ask any questions until we're out of the house," he said with an unusual shakiness in his voice. He picked up Bob and ran towards the front door. I followed him as he hastily unlocked it. He barely gave me enough time to put on my shoes before pushing me out of the house, and then immediately locked the front door behind us. He rummaged through his pockets trying to find his phone. He quickly realized he left it inside the house, so he turned towards me and said with noticeable urgency in his voice, "Give me your phone. We have to call the police." I gave him the phone, but before he could use it, I asked him, "Can you at least tell me what the hell is going on?" "You really wouldn't want to know." He brushed me off. I snatched the phone out of his hand. With visible annoyance on my face, I said, "I do want to know. I'm not giving you my phone before you tell me why you're acting like a mental patient." "Fine, I'll tell you, but please stay as calm as you can." He told me before taking a deep breath. "Yesterday you cut me off before I could tell you why I didn't think the clown was so bad, you see. Some guy gave him some money. Then the clown gave the guy some cards with pictures of animals on them. As soon as the guy picked the card he wanted, the clown would mimic the animal that was on the card. He imitated a frog, then a dog. The croaks and barks were exactly like the real thing. If I closed my eyes, I wouldn't notice that a human being is making those sounds." "Yeah, so?" I asked, very confused by his story. "Well, he could also do a cat impression," he said with a defeated look on his face. Better Bargains has a zero kudzu policy. They have their origins in the American Southeast, where kudzu is just all over the place. A massive carpet of green smothering forests, burying houses, and causing all sorts of trouble. So, this chain of superstores goes crazy whenever they see the tiniest sprout of the stuff. But I don't live in the Southeast. I live in the Midwest, and I hadn't even seen kudzu in person until they came here. I should start from the beginning. When I was hired at Better Bargains, one of the first things they trained me on was their zero kudzu policy. This was about a year after they had first opened, and I think the kudzu appeared around that same time. There were many abandoned houses in the area, and the tenacious vine already claimed most of them by the time I applied at Better Bargains. I would pass by some on my way to work every day. The town was dying. I don't know why any superstores would open here. Maybe it was because the land was cheap, or it was a good midway point between places that were doing better. Whatever the reason, it seems to be a good one because they are always busy. Cutting back the kudzu was a full-time job in itself. The other front-end workers and I took turns so that no one worker had to spend their entire shift outside in the sun. It was early in the year, but we kept summer in mind. There was always someone out there, pulling the vines off the walls and trimming them. On the first day I trained with the shift supervisor, let's call him Kyle. Kyle and I were clearing away kudzu together. He made sure I could do it properly. "You missed some leaves," a voice behind us said. Kyle and I about jumped out of our skins. Kyle spun around and clocked the assistant manager in the eye, knocking him flat. He quickly apologized and helped him to his feet. "That is all right. Everyone makes mistakes," said the assistant manager. He pointed to the trail of leaves we had left in our wake. "Just make sure you bag everything. Even the smallest piece left behind can sprout into a new vine." Not for a second did his used car salesman's smile leave his face. The assistant manager, let's call him Scott, had a special hatred of kudzu. When he was clearing it away, it seemed like he was on a personal crusade against the plant. When he wasn't, he was checking up on those who were to make sure they were working up to management's, or rather his, standard. As for Kyle and me, we went back to pulling kudzu from the building. Kyle told me that Scott was once a used car salesman, and that was why he never stopped smiling. There were two things we knew about him. He used to be a car salesman, and he hated kudzu. It wasn't the last time Scott would startle someone, but after this, he always seemed to appear just out of arm's reach. The way he smiled was downright creepy. It was the smile of someone who knew they put you on guard and was trying to put you at ease. Better Bargains was always busy, and we were always understaffed. I didn't complain. All of my previous jobs were also understaffed, and I was used to it. When I was first hired, the sheer amount of customers baffled me. There seemed to be more people passing through the store than living in the whole town. I commented on this, and the others just shrugged. A week after I had begun working there, the building was vandalized. During the night, someone had spray-painted some sort of sign or sigil on the side of the building. Kyle was the one who discovered it when he started cutting kudzu in the morning. Scott must have thought it was somehow comical, as he couldn't stop giggling to himself all day. The rest of the managers were more annoyed by Scott's chuckling than the building being defaced. A crew of painters to cover had shown up to paint over the sigil by the time I had arrived for my shift, and I didn't have the opportunity to see it. We had anti-vandalism training the next day. Mostly it was a reiteration of stuff that was covered in the initial employee training. Stuff like, if we spot a vandal, alert management promptly, or report any spray-painted markings. But there were some new, oddly specific things too, like, don't bite any discovered vandals, no matter how delicious they appear. Don't drink anything they offer, and don't ask for their teeth. Management explained these specific stipulations as the result of prior incidents at other locations, and they had to include them for legal reasons. The weirdness continued when roses started growing alongside the kudzu. At first I thought it was just some wild brambles, but then it started blooming. Large red roses appeared all over the lawn and up the sides of the superstore. I did a little research, and roses don't just pop up in random places. They are shrubs for one, not vines, and are not nearly as aggressive as a kudzu, by all accounts. It seems to me that the kudzu should have killed the roses if our lawn mowers and garden trimmers hadn't done the trick. I think any other place would have killed to have an entire lawn of roses, but not better bargains. We were instructed to cut and bag them just like the kudzu. The managers reasoned that their thorns would cause more trouble than they were worth. The roses seemed to terrify them. They would only speak of them in hushed tones, as if the plants might hear them, and would wince whenever someone would speak too loudly of the problem. Kyle took great pleasure in doing this. Scott was especially fearful. He didn't work outside for a whole week after they appeared. He never dropped that big, wide grin of his, but he was noticeably pale. Even I could see it, and I was horrible at seeing that kind of thing. One time someone came back in for cutting and bagging with a section of rose stem stuck to their jeans. The thorns had caught enough to hold on, but not enough to prick their bearer. Scott yelped like a kicked dog and loud enough to echo off the superstore walls. Whether or not this had caused him to lose his big, wide smile, nobody could say. That wasn't the bit that caught our attention. Afterward, management reminded us to leave all trimmed vegetation outside. Maybe Scott was allergic to roses, but then again he did go back to working outside after a while. The building was eventually tagged by vandals again. They had painted more of that sigil on the wall during the night. I got to see it this time. It was a dot surrounded by 3 radial, vaguely S-shaped lines, which were all within an inverted triangle. The paint crew was called back. They had the sigils covered up by the time my shift was ended. Then the superstore was tagged again. All 3 times they had somehow defaced the building without showing up on the security cameras or triggering the motion sensors. Management had had enough. The police sent a couple of officers to watch over the building while Better Bargain looked to hire a security guard. This stopped the vandalism for a couple of days, but the day the guard was hired, the vandalism started again. The guard hadn't seen anything. Nothing was caught by the cameras either. The only evidence the vandals had ever been there were the sigils, and there were more of them now. It was like they were mocking us. Well, mocking management, the same sigils spray-painted over and over again. Despite the vandalism's frequency, its volume was manageable. I wondered how much it cost to undo for a brief moment. Ultimately, it wasn't my problem. I just tried to avoid the wet paint when it was cutting and bagging. The days were getting longer and hotter, and more than once did I get paint all over my gloves. If the vandalism outside made management angry, they were downright furious when it started appearing inside. Whether it happened at night or during the day was impossible to tell for sure, but it was probably during store hours because the latrines weren't exactly under lock and key. The sigil was painted on the walls, the floor, and even the ceiling. The real mystery was how they got the kudzu and roses inside without anyone noticing. Management's response to this was bizarrely tranquil. I thought they might call the police or hire more security. Instead, they brought out ladders and dusty cardboard boxes. They began to hang wicker effigies and charms from the walls, aisles, and ceilings. The ones doing the hanging were as if they were in a trance, like the charms warded off the agitation caused by the rampant vandalism. They spent the rest of the day doing this. This was right at the beginning of Pride Month, and those who loudly disapproved of Pride were just beginning to make themselves known. The other employees told me this happened last year as well. The protesting of Pride, not the roses, vandalism, or wicker figures. A much less mysterious campaign of vandalism began. Those in the throes of moral panic began dismantling and scribbling on anything that vaguely resembled a rainbow. As we were already on high alert for this kind of behavior, the perpetrators were caught almost immediately. Management did not tolerate these people, not this year. Having ill-doers they could catch did wonders for their morale, and they did not hesitate to take out their frustrations on the protesters. One loud, middle-aged woman demanded to see the straight section. At least, I think she was middle-aged. She had too many facelifts and lip fillers to tell. While she was carrying on, a man I assumed was her husband was filming. She shouted about having to explain something to her kids. The children in question were visibly trying to distance themselves from their mother, even as she reached for them, trying to keep them in the film frame. As she threw herself against the shelves and wailed about rainbows, she knocked against several wicker effigies and charms, which she ignored. The protesters raged against all things colorful. Not even crayons were safe, yet they ignored the blatant witchcraft effigies and charms. I commented on this to my co-workers. They didn't seem to care. In the long run, neither did I. Whatever dark magic management was doing worked. The mysterious vandalism stopped. and the sigils ceased to appear. Now, things would have been great if they had a spell to get rid of the not-so-mysterious vandalism. When I arrived for my shift the next day, the managers handed out flyers to all the employees. I accepted one and read it. It was a notice from the management about accepting food from strangers. Specifically, it told us not to accept it. I assumed it was one of those legally required things. Kyle snorted derisively. "Obvious," he said. "Common sense, even." I grabbed my garden shears, gloves and bag and headed out for my work of trimming vegetation from the other walls. I hadn't taken 5 steps out of the front door when someone stepped in front of me. They said nothing, but held out a large wooden bowl that was filled to the brim with water and kudzu leaves. They had a smile on their face that was bigger than Scott's. It was the smile of someone who knew they put you on guard and was trying to put you at ease. I stepped past the person with the bowl, and they had the sense not to follow me. That alone made them better than some of the people inside. I didn't care enough to tell management right away, and the person with the bowl had left by the time I was done cutting vegetation. They were weird, but not the weirdest thing to happen recently. The day after, a makeshift stand had been erected in front of the entrance of the superstore. It had appeared in the time between me starting my shift and me taking my turn cutting kudzu. The stand was run by some children who seemed pleased with themselves. They had the same smiles as that person with the bowl had yesterday. The stand was facing the entrance rather than the customers who would be entering. On the stand were a package of plastic cups and a dispenser filled with more of that kudzu water. I spied some rose petals drifting among the leaves. Upon seeing me, the children each filled a disposable cup with the kudzu rose tea stuff. They surrounded me and held out their cups, chattering in a gleeful cacophony I couldn't make heads or tails of. I called out to the head manager, mostly because he happened to be nearby. He was already on his way over to me. He began shooing the children away and told me to get back to work. As I left them behind, he began to do what I can only assume was an exorcism. On the 3rd day, I was able to begin clearing away kudzu without incident. The weather is usually mild in June where we were, but that day was unusually hot and humid. Sweat beaded on my forehead, and I wiped it away with my forearm. I pulled the kudzu and roses away from the wall and cut them to the ground. The rose stems were stiff and woody, and difficult to bunch up to stuff into bags. My arms were covered in scratches from their thorns, and I was too miserable from the heat to pay them any attention. "Need something to drink?" someone said. I looked up and saw a co-worker holding out a disposable coffee cup. While management recognized we needed water to survive, they didn't want to spend money on water bottles. They just had us use the disposable cups from the break area. I took the cup and drank. It tasted weird. I took another sip to confirm the first. It still tasted weird. It popped off the lid and looked inside. Kudzu leaves and rose petals swirled inside. I looked up at my co-worker in shock. Then I realized that not only did I not recognize their face, but they also had the same off-putting grin as the others who tried to get me to drink this stuff. I threw down the cup and clocked him in the eye. He collapsed in a heap like he had no bones. I grabbed up the polo shirt and found that not only did he have no bones, but he also had none of the other human stuff. This co-worker was just a bunch of kudzu and roses stuffed in a Better Bargains uniform and artificial skin. I blinked. Unsure what to do, I stuffed his remains into a bag and turned back to the vegetation still on the walls. To my shock, all the roses were dead. They had all dried up and wilted. Their stems were still stiff and woody, but they snapped easily and were much easier to stuff into bags. I finished my shift without incident. I thought nothing would come of my encounter with the imposter, but something truly bizarre would happen later that night. I awoke at midnight with a sharp pain in my chest. Not a deep stabbing pain, it was more like someone was cutting my skin with a razor. I clawed at it with my hands. My sleep-addled brain decided I had a splinter and that removing it would stop the pain. I switched on the light and took off my shirt. I saw a black dot on a welt on my left pec. It looked more like a bee stinger than a splinter. I found some tweezers and tried to remove it, but couldn't grab it. My initial reaction of clawing with my nails must have driven it deep down into my skin. Then the pain moved. Another dot appeared next to it. I tried to remove this new irritation, but instead of going away, it grew. The second dot grew into a vaguely S-shaped line, and a third dot appeared. I got up and went to the bathroom. My bedroom didn't have a mirror. I scratched my irritated skin as I watched the markings grow in the mirror. A tattoo was spontaneously appearing on my chest. It was a form I was all too familiar with. The very same sigil that was painted so many times on the Better Bargains walls. A dot, 3 S-shaped lines, all within a triangle. This is all a roundabout way of saying that some weird plant people tricked me into drinking their weird tea, and now a weird sigil has appeared on my chest. Does anyone know what this is? Should I do something about this? Should I get it removed? I have no idea what is going on, and any advice would be greatly appreciated. It happened on July the 5th. I'll never forget that day, nor the hangover that came with it. My eyes were swollen, glistening red. My head felt like a Metallica concert. Ugh, why did I stay out so late? Truth be told, it wasn't my fault. It was Rowan's fault. She's my girlfriend. She wanted to party. Don't judge her. Unlike me, Rowan is very smart. She studied biology. My boss, who's also my uncle, made me work that morning so he could have the entire weekend off. Needless to say, I partied my face off the night before. It was Independence Day, for Christ's sake. What did he expect? Uncle Ray owns Brews and Wash, a laundromat which serves alcohol. It's located in the old part of town, where the buildings are ramshackle and derelict. The clientele is, well, suspect at best, but for the most part they don't bother me much. First off, I'd never been in the basement before. It's off limits. Plus, I've never opened the store. That's Ray's job, but he gave me the keys and told me not to do anything stupid. Now don't get me wrong, it's an easy job. Even an idiot like me can do it. Still, it would have been nice if Ray had warned me about the door. The basement is where Ray keeps the beer. Judging from the empty fridge, we'd sold a ton of beer the day before, like who does laundry on the 4th. First thing I had to do was stock up the beer fridge, so I went downstairs to the basement. It's a good thing I'm short, or dare I say, vertically challenged. I had to crouch. The basement has a low ceiling, the walls are dry-laid stone. It smelled like piss and mouse droppings, cobwebs covering every inch of the mossy walls. I hate old basements. There was only one light bulb, dangling vicariously at the bottom of the stairs, probably not safe. At the bottom of the stairs was a stack of empties, with fruit flies zooming in and out of soggy cardboard boxes. As I searched the basement, looking for the beer, something scurried across my foot, causing me to jump and smash my head on the low-lying ceiling. It hurt like hell, let me tell you. The sooner I found the beer, the better. Already the basement was giving me the heebie-jeebies. I turned on my phone's flashlight and scanned the tight quarters. Mostly the basement was filled with junk, soap boxes galore. Several cases of beer were stacked against the furthest wall to my right, next to the broken mop bucket. I shoved my phone into my pocket and grabbed a case. Then I scooted back towards the stairs, careful not to trip on anything. I stopped. There was a peculiar door hidden behind the stairs, roughly 4 feet tall and covered in filth. Around the handle was a derelict sign declaring, "Do not enter." In the middle of the door, behind a curtain of cobwebs, was a human skull. It was painted, probably red, but it's hard to tell. It was severely faded, ravaged from time. Just looking at it creeped me out. But the door held me prisoner. I couldn't keep my eyes off it. Attached was a sizable silver lock. Without knowing it, I was fumbling the key ring and discovered a bizarre key shaped like a human skull. It looked extremely old as the building at least. I'll bet that weird-looking key fits that lock. For a moment I stood stupidly, grappling with the key ring while balancing the beer, wondering about the "Do not enter" sign. Bzzz. Something buzzed, startling me. I sprang upstairs like a scared kid in a cheesy horror story. Stupid phone. Rowan texted me, asking how I was feeling. Deeply embarrassed, I replied with a thumbs up and a series of hearts. I'll send a proper message once I finish prepping the store. It was nearing 9 o'clock, opening time. No more dilly-dallying. Before putting my phone away, I texted Ray, asking about the strange door. Not surprisingly, Ray ignored my text, probably still sleeping. Ray can be a jerk when he wants to be, let's just say, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get this shift over with so I could curl up next to Rowan and snuggle. Fighting a sore head, I stocked the fridge, prepared the till, and did the paperwork. Ray is old. He still prefers paper over computers. Says it's safer that way. Whatever, at least I'm getting paid extra for being here, I reminded myself. I could use the money. I made myself a coffee, then switched the sign to open, wondering who does laundry at this godforsaken hour. On this day, no less. 3 cups of coffee and 2 restroom breaks later, I started getting antsy. My mind kept returning to the door with the "Do Not Enter" sign. Since there were no customers, I could dash downstairs, open the door, and have a peek. I pondered this for the better part of an hour. Still no customers. The key ring danced between my fingers, beckoning me, until finally, I submitted. Just a quick peek, I reminded myself. If only I resisted, if only customers came, if only... The stairs protested under my weight, creaking as I crept. The light from my phone made strange shadows, which skittered across the stone walls, like cockroaches. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, my heart suddenly stopped. The door was shimmering. The skull seemed alive, its empty eyes sizing me up. I fumbled the keys, dropping them. When I scooped them up, they were sticky and gross from the gooey floor, which probably hadn't been cleaned in 100 years. The skull was taunting me, daring me to enter. It was pulsating, breathing, perhaps. I knew this was impossible, that the darkness was hampering my better judgment, so I laughed, teasing myself. But damn, was I jittery. Go on, I told myself. Can't chicken out now. Just a peek. Maybe I'll discover long-lost treasures. Classic baseball cards, perhaps. How cool is that? I wiped my sweaty brow, which made my face dirty. Every inch of the basement was filthy. Ugh, it's now or never, I told myself. So before I could chicken out, I jammed the strange key into the silver lock. It clicked. The door swung over. Thick fog wafted into the basement, which had a distinct smell like rotten eggs. I gagged. Cautiously, crouched as low as possible, I poked my head inside the door. Just one peek, I reminded myself. It was pitch dark, icy cold. Laggardly, I passed through the door. My heart was racing, sweat stinging my eyes. I snatched my phone and turned on the light. All I saw was fog. Disappointed, I shook my head, cursing my stupidity. Careful not to smash my head, I crept back upstairs, both relieved and disappointed. Halfway upstairs, the door dinged. A customer. It was Maybelle, an elderly lady who does her laundry once a month. She's nice enough. I watched her load the machines, then sit by the big bay window and start reading a paperback. She lives across the street, in an apartment complex. Once, when I asked her why she doesn't use their facilities, she told me she liked getting out once in a while. Besides, she doesn't trust their machines. Panicking, I realized I hadn't shut the basement door. Who knows what could crawl out of that tiny crevice? Cursing my existence and nursing a headache, I inched downstairs. Then I stopped. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Snow. It rarely snows in my town, even in the winter. But in July, in a basement, this made zero sense. The snow was wafting in from the half-open door. My trembling hands found the key ring, while my eyes stared in bewilderment. I'd better shut the damn door before the entire basement fills with snow. I took one small step and slipped, smashing my head against the stairs. My entire body protested, especially my head, which already hurt. Shivering and sore all over, I crawled towards the door, complaining the entire time, and slammed it shut. Whoosh! Immediately, the snowstorm ceased. When I shoved the key into the lock, however, nothing happened. The door wouldn't lock, no matter how hard I tried. Again, I cursed myself. What on God's green earth have I gotten myself into? That's when I noticed the skull. It was grinning. For a moment I stared, mesmerized. It's not every day you find a skull-clad door grinning back at you with a "Do Not Enter" sign. When I jammed the key into the lock, this ought to do it. The door spat it out. Not to be deterred, I dropped to my knees, grateful I'd worn jeans, and searched through the fresh layer of snow, but I couldn't find the key. I went for my phone, and I dropped it too. Frustration was getting the best of me. Losing a key was one thing, my phone on the other hand. Bewildered, I swept my hands across the icy floor until I found my phone, which was lying on top of the key. I grabbed both, then bolted upstairs. I could care less about locking the stupid door. Whatever was down there was Ray's responsibility, not mine. Standing behind the counter, pretending to be busy, I fidgeted with my phone, hoping it was okay. It wasn't. None of the apps seemed to work. Great. Like I needed this. I did nothing for an hour except pout, while Maybelle neatly folded her laundry. Moments after she left, a middle-aged man entered, asking about the beer prices. When I responded, he left, shaking his head, grumbling. As soon as the place emptied, I started shivering. It was getting colder by the minute. Automatically, I reached for my phone and tried texting Ray again. Of course, my phone wouldn't work. Worse. My screensaver was now a skull. Same skull as on the door. It was laughing at me. Anger fueled my next decision. I may not be the most intimidating guy, but I'm far from wimpy. I work out regularly and play baseball on the weekends. I can handle myself, thank you very much. Time to teach whatever is down there a lesson. Sometimes courage comes at the worst time. I marched downstairs, keys in hand. To my surprise, the door had reopened. The basement was completely covered in snow, 2 inches at least. Shivering, I slammed the door shut, stuffed the key into the lock and turned. Nothing. Heavy winds howled. The door belched a blustery storm which blew right through me, sliding me to the other end of the basement. Shocked and horrified, I dragged myself along the icy floor until I reached the door. I swear the skull was mocking my miserable existence. My body wouldn't stop shaking. The sooner I'm out of here, the better. I decided right then and there I was going to march upstairs and close shop. Screw Ray. Besides, he'd be saving money, seeing as how the place was dead. The door dinged. I'd better get back upstairs. It was rough going, let me tell you. The stairs were small and slippery. I clenched the rickety handrail with all my might, careful not to smash my head or worse, fall head over heels backwards. When I returned behind the counter, I was shocked to see my girlfriend standing there, arms crossed. Her eyes were confrontational. I didn't dare speak. We had a stare-off, one I was destined to lose. My phone died, I finally said, breaking the silence. She smiled beautifully, but still, she regarded me with suspicion. Then I remembered my face was filthy, and I was a shivering mess. "What is it?" she asked, clearly concerned. I couldn't lie to her, nor could I outsmart her, so I flat out told her. "Want to see something strange?" She looked at me with skepticism, but nodded yes. Hand in dirty hand, we descended into the basement. "This makes 0 sense," she said matter-of-factly. Part of her face showed fear, but there was something else as well. Curiosity. By now the basement was a junk-filled hockey rink. I pointed to the door, and she gasped. She let go of my hand and glided towards the door, ducking under the stairs. "Let's go in," she said, her eyes big and brown. Resistance was futile. She was always braver than me, one of the things I loved about her. "It's too cold," I said through chattering teeth. Then I remembered something. "Wait here." I scooted upstairs to the lost and found bin and rummaged through it until I found a pair of coats. "Take this," I said, offering her a coat. Before I knew it, Rowan was leading me through the eerie door. "I don't believe it," she gasped. "What is this place?" We walked, head down, until we came to a clearing. It was a winter wonderland, a palace made of snow. It was too dark to see much, so we crept forward, cautiously. My knees wobbled, my heart near explosion. I hated Rowan at this moment, or perhaps I hated her bravado. Something didn't feel right about this place. I knew this was a bad idea. "This is amazing," she said, seemingly unaffected by the wintry weather. I, on the other hand, was freezing to death. The coat helped, but barely. Something screamed. We halted, scanning the vicinity, seeing nothing but white. More screaming, like a million souls crying at once. "We're in a torture chamber," she declared. I was going to rebut when the ground below us started cracking. The ice moaned. "Oh no," I thought, "we're going to fall through." Violently, the ground jerked. I slipped and fell backwards, my hand leaving hers. She reached out, trying to save me, our fingers narrowly touching. but I ended up in a plot of snow. Then the unthinkable happened. The ground opened up and swallowed her whole. "Ro!" I cried, watching her fall through the ice. Just before she disappeared, her eyes found mine. In them I saw love. Then she was gone. I called out for her again and again, weeping. Tears froze on my ashen face. The weather was worsening, the torrent of screams more severe. Crack! Belly first, I dragged myself towards the hole in the ice, holding on for dear life. The ground around me was swelling. One more crack and I'm a goner. I reached the gap, looked down, and shuddered. Rowan was right. It was a torture chamber. Beasts, with thick, mangy fur and sword-like claws, were tearing people apart, limb by limb. Blood and snow and fur collided. Mounds of bodies lay frozen, caked in crimson blood, moaning and crying. My mind couldn't comprehend what it was seeing. There must have been millions of souls down there, all suffering. Carefully, I crawled backwards toward the door, fearful it would close and I'd be trapped. My hands were blue from frostbite. The door seemed impossibly far. I didn't think we'd walk this far. The ground crunched as I crawled. A speck of light found me, and I yelped. I was crawling on the bones of the dead. Another scream, this one I recognized. "Jackson, get out while you can!" "Ro?" My meager voice fell flat. Her words terrified me, made worse by the fact that she's the best part of my life. I couldn't just leave her. The whirling winds told me otherwise. My face was being pelted with ice pellets. I had to escape. Finally, I reached the door and loped through it. Slamming it shut, I jammed the key into the hole, and this time it clicked. Swoop! My heart was heavy. I needed to help my girlfriend before it was too late. Deep down, I knew it was already too late, but I refused to believe it. First thing I did was close the laundromat. After checking my phone, still not working, I dragged myself to the police station. I hated doing so, but I had to save Rowan. I told them everything. The dispatcher laughed and twirled her hair, chewing her bubble gum. After an hour of waiting, an officer greeted me. He was old, near retirement, and looked crabby. I led him to the laundromat and showed him the door. By now the snow had melted, but the floor was sticky and wet. He told me to open it. I took a deep breath. Then I stuck the key inside the door with the "Do Not Enter" sign. The key snapped. Ah, crap. The cop snarled. I shrugged, trying to ignore the prying eyes of the human skull, pestering me. The officer was having none of it. Eventually, after questioning me again and again, he contacted Rowan's parents, who were distraught. Then he contacted Ray, who was livid. Fast forward a few months. Ultimately, I was relieved of any charges, for the time being at least. Rowan never turned up. Foul play, they declared, me being the #1 suspect. Ray, whose surveillance cameras were non-functional, fired me. We haven't spoken since. Everyone in town looks at me funny, no doubt. They think I'm a murderer. Missing Rowan more each day, I've decided to get my life straightened out, whatever that means. Yesterday, while on my way to school, I've been accepted into a community college. I was stopped by the same cop who questioned me earlier this summer. He was plain-clothed and looked fatally exhausted. "I'm retired," he said. "Follow me." To my surprise, he led me into a donut shop, ordered coffees and crullers, then sprung something remarkable on me. "I believe you found it," he said flatly. "The doorway to hell." I spit out my coffee, soaking him. "Hell is cold, not hot," he said, not bothering to wipe the coffee stains from his khaki shirt. "And I've spent most of my life searching for it." He asked me to describe it, with detail. I tried, but instead I started weeping. I'd finally gotten over the grief. Now this, he reached into his pocket, produced a small black box and opened it. What I saw made my skin crawl. A key. It was large and silver. At its tip was a skull. The skull was grinning. "Let's go save your girlfriend, shall we?" About 7.5 years ago, my sister Sarah told me she wanted to adopt a dog. I didn't think much of it. I thought it would be good for her, something to lift her spirits after a rough breakup with her fiancé. And plus, she used to have this rescued dog, Vince. and loved every moment of his company. So it wasn't surprising when she mentioned she wanted to adopt another one. She said she wanted to check out the local animal shelter to find the one. Naturally, I agreed to tag along, not realizing at the time how strange things would become. You see, my car AC condenser broke a couple of weeks back, and I hadn't had the chance to get it fixed. So, we drove to the shelter with my raggedy-ass car, windows down, elbows out. The sun was high up, and after several days of rain, humidity was at its peak. Pits were sweating like crazy. If I had balls, they'd be sticking to my thighs. I was just complaining the whole way through on an hour-and-a-half drive. Finally, we got to the shelter. The place was a bit run down, with faded signage and peeling paint, but it was the closest one we got. Sarah's been excited, talking about different breeds, and how she wanted to adopt a dog that needed a second chance. A dog that might not be chosen by most people. Inside, the shelter was filled with incessant barking and whining, paired with the sweet, sweet aroma of the outside dog smell. The air was heavy with the scent of wet fur, disinfectant, and something musty that seemed to seep into the walls. A tired-looking volunteer greeted us with a humdrum hello. Sarah enthusiastically jumped in front of me and introduced her name politely, with excitement written across her face. She told him she's looking to adopt a dog, so he led us down the rows of kennels, where dogs of all shapes and sizes wagged their tails, some barking with excitement, others looking up at us with forlorn eyes. It was near the back of the shelter that Sarah stopped. There, sitting quietly in a kennel, was an older, medium-sized dog with salt and pepper fur. His eyes, dark and human-like, gave me the chills. I tried to contain myself but couldn't help letting out a stifled laugh. She gently slapped me on my arms and whispered, "Stop it." Sarah lowered down to its level and greeted it softly, almost a whisper. She goes, "Hi, big guy." The dog's weird eyes locked onto hers almost immediately. He wasn't barking or jumping around like the other dogs. Instead, he sat there, still and composed, as if he already knew she was the one who would take him home. "This is him," Sarah said softly, her voice full of certainty. The dog's name was Charlie, according to the small plaque on his kennel. The volunteer explained that Charlie had been there for a while. Most people passed him over because of his age. He was somewhere around 8 or 9 years old, and while his health was stable, he didn't have the energy or youthfulness that many people wanted in a dog. I guess Sarah didn't care about any of that. She fell in love with him instantly, and there was no doubt in her mind that Charlie was coming home with her. After filling out the necessary paperwork and gathering some supplies, we left the shelter with Charlie in tow. He sat quietly in the back seat on the ride to his new home, his eyes half closed, occasionally looking out the window as if he knew he was headed toward a new chapter of his life. Over the next week, Sarah and Charlie became inseparable. The dog, despite his age, seemed to brighten up her home. He was sweet and calm, just as he had been at the shelter, following her from room to room, his tail wagging gently. She sent me pictures every day, grinning as she showed off her new companion lounging on the couch, sleeping at her feet, or sniffing around the backyard. I couldn't help but feel happy for her. She'd found exactly what she was looking for in Charlie. A week later, I decided to visit her place. Sarah had a business trip out of town for a couple of days and had asked if I could check in on Charlie while she was gone. I agreed, of course. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time, just feeding the dog, making sure he had enough water, and letting him out into the backyard when needed. When I arrived, the house was quiet, and Charlie was lying on his bed in the living room, just as calm as ever. But as soon as I stepped into the room, I noticed something unsettling. Charlie's eyes were fixed on me in a way that felt different from before. He wasn't just looking at me. He was staring, his dark, human-like eyes following every movement I made. It was unnerving, to say the least. I shrugged it off, assuming he was just curious about the new person in the house. I greeted him with a, "Hey, buddy," but he just continued to give me that unsettling poker face. As I sat down on the couch, Charlie let out a low, guttural growl from where he was lying. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make my skin prickle. He seemed to be fixated on the spot I was sitting in, and I quickly realized it's probably his spot on the couch. Feeling a little silly, I scooted over, giving him his spot. Charlie got up from his bed. He then climbed up onto the couch, settling into the spot I had vacated, but his demeanor didn't relax. Instead, he started barking, loud, sharp barks that echoed through the living room, his years-stained canine teeth full on display, letting me know he ain't playing. I stood up quickly, startled by the sudden aggression. This wasn't the sweet, calm dog I'd seen before. Something about him felt off, different. I couldn't put my finger on it, but a strange unease settled over me. Rather than dealing with his aggressive behavior, I decided to leave. I filled his water bowl, left plenty of food, and made sure the back door was locked, but left the doggy door open so he could go outside if he needed to. I figured it would be easier to check on him the next day. I didn't need to be there if he was going to act like that. On my way home, I left a message to Sarah's phone. Yes, I tattled on her dog. I told her that Charlie was acting weird and all. I figured that he might not be feeling well. The next day, I returned to my sister's house, hoping everything would be back to normal. But when I opened the door, I was greeted by chaos. The house was a mess, a pigsty. The floors were covered in trash, and the unmistakable smell of dog feces hit me like a wave. It was everywhere, in every corner, as if Charlie had completely lost control. And then there was the pantry, which I checked and made sure it was closed when I left the day before. The door was wide open, and the shelves looked ransacked. Sarah had a box of MREs, meals ready to eat, that she kept for emergencies, and they were scattered across the floor, torn open and half-eaten. But the dog food, which sat in a bag right next to the pantry, had been left untouched. What struck me as even more bizarre was that the pantry has a doorknob. I can't imagine how Charlie's dog paw turning the knob. I stood there trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Now, before you ask, yes, I checked everywhere to see if there were any signs of breaking and entering. Everything was locked, and the only way in and out was the doggy door. Unless the thief was a small child, it's possible. Charlie, meanwhile, sat in the middle of the room, his eyes once again locked onto mine, that same eerie stare. He didn't bark this time, didn't growl. He just watched me as I cleaned up the mess. His gaze, never wavering, still gives me the heebie-jeebies thinking about it. After cleaning up the house, I filled Charlie's bowl with food and water again, left the doggy door open, and got out of there as quickly as I could. I blocked the pantry door with one of Sarah's dining chairs to make sure it would stay closed. The entire situation was starting to make my skin crawl. I could still picture Charlie's weird fucking stare, his human-like eyes. On the drive home, I called Sarah again, telling her what had happened. I expected her to be concerned, but instead she just laughed. "You're being ridiculous," she said. "He's an old dog. He probably just got confused." Confused or not, something about Charlie wasn't sitting right with me. But my sister seemed unconcerned, and she told me she'd be back the next day. So I let it go. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was overreacting. The next afternoon, my sister returned from her trip, and I went over to check on her and Charlie. To my surprise, the house was spotless. Everything was back in order, and there was no sign of the destruction I had witnessed the day before. And Charlie? Well, he was back to being his sweet, calm self, sitting next to my sister with his tail wagging gently, as if nothing had ever happened. As we sat in her living room, I brought up the strange behavior I had noticed. I told her about the growling, the barking, the pantry being ransacked, the untouched dog food. I even told her about the doorknob being round and smooth. "It's impossible for a dog to turn it," I said, but my sister just laughed, brushing it off like I was making a big deal out of nothing. "Charlie's a good dog," she said, scratching his ears affectionately. "You probably just stressed him out. He's old, you know. He's not used to having other people around." Maybe she was right. Maybe it was just the stress of her being gone, the change in routine that had caused Charlie to act out. But as I sat there, watching my sister dote on him, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Charlie's human-like eyes, once again, found mine, and for just a moment, I saw something in them, something dark, something knowing. It was gone as quickly as it had appeared, and the sweet, calm dog was back, but the unease remained. I left my sister's house that day, trying to convince myself that everything was fine, but deep down, I knew I wouldn't be able to look at Charlie the same way again. Something had changed, and whether my sister wanted to admit it or not, I couldn't shake the feeling that Charlie wasn't just an ordinary dog. Something was lurking beneath that calm exterior, something I hoped I would never have to confront again. Charlie kept my sister company for 5 years, but unfortunately with his old age he passed. My sister just mentioned him the other day at the time of this writing, asked me if I remember him. She told me how she misses him, and he's such a good boy. I gave her a chuckle and said, "That dog freaked me out." She did the boudet with her lips while punching my arm and said, "You're being mean." Then she laughed while rubbing her eyes. Oh, Charlie boy. How could I forget Charlie? The picture of his smug face is forever etched to my brain. His eyes, dark and human-like, still gives me the chills. They seem to watch with unsettling awareness, as though there was more behind them than just a dog's mind. I still couldn't shake the feeling that he understood far more than he should. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.